Welcome to the Sleepy Stoic. Tonight, we turn our attention to a subject that many prefer to avoid, a topic often relegated to whispers and euphemisms, something spoken of only when necessity demands it. We are going to spend these hours together contemplating death, not in morbid fascination, not with anxiety or dread, but with the calm, clear-eyed wisdom that the ancient Stoics brought to this most universal of human experiences. This may seem like an unusual choice for an evening of philosophical reflection. You might wonder why anyone would choose to think about mortality as they settle into rest, why death would be a companion for these quiet hours. Yet the Stoics understood something profound that our modern world has largely forgotten. They knew that remembering death, far from being a source of despair or anxiety, could become one of the greatest sources of peace, clarity, and purposeful living that a human being might discover. The practice they called Memento Mori, remember that you will die, was not meant to cast a shadow over life. It was meant to illuminate it, like a lamp held up in a vast room. The awareness of mortality shows us what truly matters and what does not. It reveals the contours of a life well lived. It separates the essential from the trivial, the meaningful from the merely urgent. We live in a culture that treats death as an enemy to be defeated, a tragedy to be postponed at all costs, or simply an unpleasant fact to be ignored for as long as possible. We hide it away in hospitals and funeral homes, speak of it in hushed tones, and distract ourselves from its inevitability with endless entertainment and busyness. We act as though we have infinite time, as though tomorrow is guaranteed, as though the moments we are living through now will somehow be repeated if we waste them. The Stoics took a different approach entirely. They did not hide from death or pretend it did not exist. They brought it close. They examined it. They made it a daily companion in their thoughts. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who ruled the greatest empire of his age, wrote in his personal journal about death constantly. Not because he was depressed or morbid, but because he found that remembering his mortality helped him to rule justly, to treat people with kindness, to not be swept away by the trivial irritations of his day. Seneca, the philosopher and statesman, wrote letters to his friends about the shortness of life and the importance of living each day as though it might be the last. He watched men scramble after wealth and status, postponing their real living until some future date when they would have enough, when they would be secure, when they would finally be ready to begin. And he saw them die before that day ever came, their lives unlived, their potential unrealized. Epictetus, who began his life as a slave before becoming one of the most respected philosophers in Rome, taught his students that death was not an evil but a natural process, no more to be feared than the falling of leaves in autumn or the setting of the sun. To fear death, he said, was to misunderstand nature itself, to rage against the very structure of existence. These men were not theorizing about death from a distance. Marcus Aurelius lost multiple children. Seneca witnessed executions and political murders. Epictetus lived under the constant threat that a master might kill him with impunity. They knew death intimately, not as an abstraction but as a constant presence in their world. And yet, or perhaps because of this, they found a way to live with remarkable peace and purpose. What they discovered was this: when you truly internalize the fact that your time is limited, that this day might be your last, that the people you love will not be here forever, something shifts inside you. The petty irritations that once consumed your emotional energy begin to lose their power. The grudges you held, the slights you nursed, the trivial competitions and comparisons, all of these begin to seem like what they truly are: distractions from the precious, fleeting gift of existence. At the same time, The things that truly matter come into sharp focus. The conversation with a friend, the simple pleasure of a meal, the beauty of the sky as day transitions to night, the opportunity to be kind to a stranger, the chance to do your work with integrity. These moments, previously overlooked in the rush towards some imagined future, suddenly reveal themselves as the entire substance of life. This is the paradox that we will explore together over these hours. Remembering death does not make us morbid or depressed. It makes us alive, truly, fully alive, perhaps for the first time. It cuts through the fog of distraction and denial that normally clouds our days and allows us to see clearly what we are and what we have. The peace that comes from this practice is not the peace of resignation or defeat. It is not the peace of someone who has given up on life because it will end. It is something far deeper and more vital. It is the peace of someone who knows what they value and why. The peace of someone who is not saving their real life for later. The peace of someone who has looked at the most frightening truth of human existence and found that it need not be frightening at all. But everything is temporary. The Stoics understood this deeply. Your body, which you spend so much time and energy maintaining and worrying about, is already in the process of returning to the elements from which it came. Your reputation, which you guard so carefully, will be forgotten within a generation or two at most. Your possessions, which you accumulate and protect, will be scattered and used by others the moment you are gone. Even your consciousness, this sense of self that seems so permanent and solid, is a flickering flame that will go out. This might sound depressing, but listen to what follows from it. If all of this is temporary, if none of it truly belongs to you permanently, then you are free. Free from the desperate clinging that causes so much suffering. Free from the anxiety of loss that poisons so much of life. Free to use these temporary things well while you have them, without the delusion that you can somehow make them permanent through sufficient worry and control. The Stoics would say that death is not something that happens to you at the end of life. It is happening continuously, in every moment. The person you were yesterday is already gone. The cells of your body have died and been replaced countless times since you were born. The child you once were no longer exists except as a memory. You are always dying, always being renewed, always in flux. The final death, the one we fear, is simply the moment when this constant process completes itself and is not renewed again. When you see death this way, not as a sudden catastrophe that interrupts life, but as a process woven into the very fabric of existence, it becomes less frightening. It becomes natural. You die and are reborn in small ways every day. You release old versions of yourself, old beliefs, old relationships, old ways of being. This is not tragic. It is how growth happens. It is how change occurs. The final death is simply the ultimate version of this constant process of letting go. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you could leave life right now and let that determine what you do and say and think. He was not advocating for a reckless disregard for the future. He was pointing out that if you lived each moment as though it might be your last, if you spoke to each person as though you might never see them again, if you approached each task as though it were the final thing you would do, you would live with an integrity and presence that is otherwise very difficult to achieve. Imagine for a moment that today is your last day alive. Not in some vague future, but today. This day with whatever tasks and encounters it contains. How would that change how you move through it? Would you be as irritated by the small inconveniences? Would you hold on to that grudge quite so tightly? Would you rush through the good moments to get to something you imagine will be better later? Most likely, you would slow down. You would pay attention. You would say the things that matter and leave unsaid the things that do not. You would appreciate the simple fact of being conscious, of being able to see and hear and feel. You would treat the people around you with more kindness, knowing this might be your last chance to do so. You would care less about impressing others and more about being genuine. You would do your work with focus and care, not because you hope for future reward, but because doing it well is itself the point. This is what Memento Mori offers, not once as a hypothetical exercise, but as a daily practice, a way of returning again and again to what the Stoics called the view from above, the perspective that sees your life in its full context, as a brief chapter in the vast story of existence, and finds in that brevity not despair but meaning. The fear of death is, in many ways, the fear underneath all other fears. We fear failure because we have limited time to achieve what we hope to achieve. We fear rejection because we want to be remembered well in the brief time we have. We fear pain because we know it will take from us some of our limited days of comfort. We fear loss because death will ultimately take everything we have accumulated. Almost every anxiety, when traced back to its root, touches this fundamental fear that we will cease to be. The Stoics noticed this, and they noticed something else as well. The fear of death is far worse than death itself. The fear is present constantly, poisoning each day with anxiety about the future. Death, when it comes, is simply an event, a transition, a natural conclusion. It is the fear of death, not death itself, that robs us of peace. As Seneca pointed out, we die every day when we worry about dying. We lose the only life we actually have, which is the present moment, to anxiety about a future we cannot control. So the Stoic practice is not to eliminate the fear of death through force of will or through distraction. It is to become so familiar with death, to contemplate it so regularly and so calmly, that it loses its power to frighten, to bring death close, to examine it, to understand it, until it becomes simply another fact of existence, no more alarming than the fact that winter follows autumn. This is not easy, especially at first. We have been conditioned to push thoughts of death away, to distract ourselves immediately when they arise. You may find resistance even now, a voice suggesting that this is too dark, too heavy, that you should think about something else. That resistance is worth noticing. It is the very thing that keeps you from the peace that lies on the other side of death: acceptance. The practice we are engaging in tonight, and that the Stoics engaged in daily, is to sit with death rather than fleeing from it. To let the reality of mortality be present in your awareness without pushing it away or dramatizing it. Simply to acknowledge it clearly and calmly. You will die. Everyone you know will die. This civilization will end. This planet will eventually be unable to support life. The sun itself will burn out. Nothing physical persists forever. There is a strange comfort in this, once you allow yourself to feel it. It means that the pressures you feel, the expectations and demands and judgments, all of these are temporary too. The embarrassing thing you did last week will be forgotten. The impressive achievement you are chasing will fade. The person whose approval you desperately want will themselves become dust. None of it has the weight and permanence that it seems to have in the moment. All of it is passing, like clouds across the sky. This does not mean that nothing matters. This is a crucial point, and a place where many people misunderstand the Stoic position. The Stoics were not nihilists. They did not believe that because everything ends, nothing has value. It is because your time is limited that how you use it matters so much. It is because people will die that treating them with kindness and love right now is important. Think of it this way. If you had infinite time, you could always do the right thing later. You could always forgive tomorrow or next year or in a century. You could put off living according to your values indefinitely, secure in the knowledge that you would eventually get around to it. But you do not have infinite time. You have this moment and an unknown number of moments after it, and then no more. That makes this moment irreplaceable. It makes now the only time that actually matters. The ancient Stoics lived in a world that was, in many ways, more directly confronted with death than ours. Infant mortality was high. Disease could sweep through a city in weeks. Wars were frequent and brutal. Political violence could claim your life for being on the wrong side of the wrong faction. The average life expectancy was perhaps half what we enjoy today. Death was not hidden away in hospitals and nursing homes. It was visible, present, undeniable. Yet, interestingly, this did not make the ancient world a place of constant terror and despair. People lived, loved, created, laughed, found meaning and joy. They did all of this while being far more aware of mortality than most modern people are. Perhaps the Stoics would suggest they were able to do this not in spite of their awareness of death, but because of it. When death is acknowledged as a constant companion rather than an enemy kept at bay, something shifts in how you relate to life. You stop postponing. You stop waiting for the perfect conditions that will never arrive. You stop saving your good dishes for special occasions and your genuine self for when you feel more ready. You become willing to live now with whatever you have, in whatever circumstances you find yourself. This willingness to engage fully with the present moment, which the awareness of death makes possible, is one of the great sources of peace in Stoic philosophy. So much of human suffering comes from being elsewhere in our minds. We are anxious about the future or regretful about the past. We are thinking about what we need to do later instead of what we are doing now. We are with one person while wishing we were with another, in one place while longing for somewhere else. But when you remember that this might be your last conversation, your last meal, your last sunset, you become present. Not because you are trying to practice mindfulness or following some technique, but because the reality of impermanence naturally draws you into the now. This moment becomes precious not because you have decided to value it, but because you recognize its irreplaceable nature. Marcus Aurelius had an exercise he would do. He would remind himself in the morning that he would encounter difficult people today, people who were ungrateful, aggressive, deceitful. But he would also remind himself that he had encountered such people before and that they had not ultimately harmed him. More importantly, he reminded himself that his own character, his own choices about how to respond, remained within his control. And underneath this exercise was the awareness that this day was not guaranteed to repeat, that this might be his last chance to respond with wisdom rather than reacting with anger. This practice transformed potentially frustrating encounters into opportunities. If you know that you might die today, and this rude person might die today, suddenly their rudeness seems less significant than the chance to treat them with patience and kindness. Not because you are trying to be a saint, but because you can see clearly what matters and what does not. The rudeness is temporary and trivial. Your character, your choice about who you will be in this moment, is the only thing of lasting significance. Seneca wrote about how people waste their lives as though they had an unlimited supply of days. They spend years working at jobs they hate, planning for a retirement they may never reach. They endure bad relationships, planning to leave them someday when the time is right. They put off their dreams and their real work, waiting for conditions that never arrive. And then, suddenly, they are old or sick, and they realize that while they were waiting to begin living, life happened and ended. This is the tragedy that Memento Mori helps us avoid. Not the tragedy of death itself, which is natural and unavoidable, but the tragedy of an unlived life. The tragedy of dying with your best self unexpressed, your kindest words unsaid, your deepest values unhonored. The tragedy of spending your brief, precious time on things you do not actually care about, in service of goals you do not actually value, trying to impress people whose opinions do not actually matter to you. There is a Stoic concept called preferred indifference. It refers to things that are preferable to have but not necessary for virtue or happiness. Wealth is a preferred indifferent. It is better to have money than not, all else being equal, but your character does not depend on it. Health is a preferred indifferent. It is better to be healthy than sick, but your inner peace does not require it. Even life itself, the Stoics would say, is a preferred indifferent. It is preferable to be alive, but your essential worth and dignity do not depend on continuing to live. This might seem harsh or cold at first hearing, but consider the freedom it offers. If your peace and your virtue do not depend on staying alive, then you do not have to live in constant fear of death. You can take reasonable precautions against it. You can prefer to live rather than die, but you do not have to be ruled by the fear of it. Your essential self, your character, your capacity for wisdom and kindness and courage, these exist as long as you exist, and they are complete in each moment. They do not require a long future to be meaningful. This is very different from the modern tendency to see life as a narrative arc that only has meaning if it reaches certain endpoints. We think we need to accomplish certain things, reach certain milestones, see our plans come to fruition for our lives to have been worthwhile. But this means we are always living in the future, always waiting for life to become meaningful later, when we achieve whatever we think we need to achieve. The Stoics rejected this entirely. Your life has meaning now in how you are being in this moment, not in what you might achieve someday, but in what you are choosing right now. Are you being honest or deceptive, kind or cruel, courageous or cowardly, wise or foolish? These are the only questions that actually matter, and they are answered in each present moment, regardless of how many more moments you have ahead of you. This present moment orientation that death awareness creates is fundamentally different from the way most of us are taught to think about life. From childhood, we are oriented toward the future. Study now so you can succeed later. Work hard now so you can be secure later. Sacrifice now so you can be happy later. The present moment is always treated as preparation for some future payoff, never as valuable in itself. But the future is never guaranteed. The Stoics knew this intimately. Marcus Aurelius himself, despite being the most powerful man in the world, could not guarantee his own tomorrow. Seneca, despite all his wisdom and wealth, was eventually forced by the Emperor Nero to take his own life. Epictetus, despite his philosophical insights, remained physically disabled and socially powerless. None of their circumstances gave them certainty about the future. What they had instead was certainty about the present. Right now, in this moment, they could choose how to think and how to respond. They could be virtuous or not. They could be wise or not. They could align with nature and reason or resist them. These choices were always available, always within their control, regardless of external circumstances or how much future time remained. This is a profound shift in how we locate meaning and value. Instead of meaning residing in some future achievement or state, it resides in present action and being. This does not make planning or working toward goals wrong or foolish. The Stoics planned and worked toward goals, but they did not make their peace conditional on achieving those goals. Their peace came from knowing they were acting rightly now, from knowing that their character and choices were good, regardless of outcomes. When you remember that you might die today, it becomes very clear which goals are worth pursuing and which are not. Would you spend today working toward impressing people you do not respect? Probably not. Would you spend today accumulating more possessions? Unlikely. Would you spend today nursing petty resentments or engaging in pointless conflicts? Almost certainly not. You would spend it doing what actually matters to you, being with people you care about, engaging in work that feels meaningful, appreciating the simple fact of being alive and conscious. The question the Stoics invite us to ask is this: if that is how you would live your last day, why is it not how you live every day? What are you waiting for? What permission do you need? What future conditions do you think will make it finally appropriate to live according to your deepest values? The practice of Memento Mori strips away the excuses and rationalizations that keep us from living fully. We tell ourselves we are too busy right now, but we will have time later. We tell ourselves we cannot afford to be generous or kind or authentic right now, but when circumstances improve, then we will. We tell ourselves we are not ready yet, we need to learn more or be more or have more, and then we will finally begin to truly live. Death does not wait for you to be ready. It does not check whether you have achieved your goals or reached the milestones you set for yourself. It comes when it comes, indifferent to your plans and preparations. This is not meant to be frightening. It is meant to be liberating. You do not need to wait to begin living in alignment with your values. You do not need permission or perfect conditions. You can begin now with whatever you have, wherever you are. Epictetus taught his students that every situation is an opportunity to practice virtue. You are stuck in traffic. That is an opportunity to practice patience. Someone insults you. That is an opportunity to practice non-reactivity and dignity. You lose something you value. That is an opportunity to practice acceptance and perspective. You face a frightening situation. That is an opportunity to practice courage. Nothing that happens to you is wasted if you use it to strengthen your character. This teaching becomes even more powerful when combined with the awareness of mortality. Each of these situations might be your last chance to practice these virtues. This traffic jam might be the final patience you show. This insult might be the last time you have the opportunity to demonstrate dignity. This loss might be the ultimate test of your acceptance. This frightening situation might be your final chance for courage. When you see it this way, no moment is trivial. Everything becomes practice, and every practice matters because you do not know which practice will be your last. This does not create pressure or anxiety. Paradoxically, it relieves it, because you are no longer waiting for the big important moments to prove yourself. Every small moment is already important. Every interaction is already meaningful. You are always already living the life that matters. The Stoics would say this is not a question. It is simply the truth. Your life is not the highlights reel. It is not the resume or the trophy collection. It is the sum of all your ordinary moments, all your small choices, all your daily habits and responses. Who you are being in the grocery store matters as much as who you are being in the job interview. How you treat the person who has nothing to offer you reveals your character more than how you treat the person who might advance your career. Death awareness clarifies this because death does not distinguish between important and unimportant moments. It can come during the mundane just as easily as during the dramatic. You might die during an ordinary trip to the store, an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, a routine conversation about nothing in particular. This means that every moment deserves your full presence and your best self, because any moment might be the last. This understanding naturally creates a life of greater integrity. Integrity is not about being perfect or never making mistakes. It is about consistency between your values and your actions, between who you say you are and who you actually are. When you live with death awareness, hypocrisy becomes much harder to sustain. You cannot spend today treating people badly and tell yourself you will make it up to them later. You cannot spend today being dishonest and tell yourself you will live with integrity starting tomorrow. You must be now what you claim to value, because now is all you are guaranteed. There is a particular quality of attention that death awareness cultivates. It is the attention you give to things when you know you will not see them again. The way you might watch a sunset more carefully on your last evening in a beloved place. The way you might listen to someone more fully when you know it might be your last conversation. The way you might savor food more completely when you know there are no more meals guaranteed. This is not a sad or desperate attention. It is clear and appreciative. It does not grasp or cling. It simply recognizes the value of what is present while it is present. This is what Memento Mori makes possible on a daily basis. When you remember that any moment might be your last encounter with this person, this place, this experience, you naturally give it fuller attention. You stop taking things for granted. You stop assuming they will always be available later. Marcus Aurelius wrote that when you wake in the morning, you should tell yourself that the people you encounter today are going to be meddling, ungrateful, violent, treacherous, envious, and unsociable. But he added that he himself had seen the nature of good and evil, and he knew that these people act as they do from ignorance of what is truly good. Moreover, he knew that he shared a common nature with them, that they were all brief participants in the same cosmic order, all equally mortal and equally deserving of patience. This practice transformed his experience of difficult people. Instead of being obstacles to his peace, they became opportunities to practice virtue and to remember his own mortality and theirs. Everyone he met was someone who would die, someone whose time was limited, someone struggling as he struggled to understand how to live well in the brief time available. This created compassion without sentimentality, patience without weakness. When you see people through the lens of shared mortality, many conflicts lose their intensity. The person who cuts you off in traffic is someone who will die. The coworker who takes credit for your work is someone whose life will end. The family member who frustrates you is someone you will lose. This does not excuse bad behavior, but it contextualizes it. It reminds you that everyone is operating within the same constraints of time and death. Everyone is dealing with the same fundamental human condition of uncertainty and finitude. This perspective makes forgiveness easier, not as a moral obligation but as a natural response. If you knew that today was the last day you would ever see someone who had wronged you, would you spend it in resentment or would you let it go? Most people, when honestly confronted with this question, would choose to let it go. The Stoic practice is to live as though this is always true, because it might be. Any goodbye might be the final goodbye. Any interaction might be the last. Seneca wrote extensively about anger and how it poisons life. He observed that angry people are miserable even when they get what they want, because anger itself is a kind of suffering. He noticed that people would spend years consumed by rage over relatively minor slights, years of their brief lives sacrificed to maintaining a grievance, and he asked what could possibly be worth that cost. Death awareness helps to answer this question clearly. Nothing is worth that cost. No insult, no betrayal, no injustice is worth spending your limited days in the prison of anger. This is not about condoning wrong or failing to seek justice. It is about refusing to let wrongs that cannot be undone continue to harm you in the present. What happened is past, cannot be changed, but how you carry it forward is entirely within your control, and carrying it as anger and resentment serves no good purpose. This is the practical wisdom that emerges from contemplating mortality. It is not abstract philosophy disconnected from daily life. It is immediately applicable guidance for how to navigate the challenges and frustrations that every life contains. When you remember that you will die, you gain almost automatic perspective on what is worth your emotional energy and what is not. Consider how much mental and emotional energy the average person spends on things that do not actually matter. Worrying about what strangers think of them, comparing their lives to others and feeling superior or inferior, ruminating on past conversations and imagining better things they could have said, rehearsing future confrontations that will likely never happen, maintaining complex social performances to manage impressions, following news and dramas that have no real impact on their actual life. None of this would survive the simple question: if I knew I would die tomorrow, would I spend today doing this? Almost certainly not. You would not care what strangers thought. You would not compare your life to others. You would not replay past conversations or rehearse future ones. You would not maintain false social performances. You would do what actually matters to you, be with people you actually care about, engage with what is actually real and present. The Stoic invitation is to live this way all the time, not just hypothetically if you knew death was tomorrow. Because you do not know. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. This is not pessimism or morbidity. It is simply accurate. You might have decades ahead of you, or you might have hours. The uncertainty is part of the human condition. The question is whether you will let that uncertainty paralyze you with fear or liberate you to live fully now. Most of our anxieties depend on the assumption of an extended future. We worry about our reputation as though it will matter for decades to come. We hoard resources as though we will need them for years ahead. We postpone difficult conversations as though there will always be time later. We delay living according to our values as though we can always start tomorrow. All of this assumes a future that is not guaranteed. When you release that assumption, when you hold your future plans lightly and your present moment firmly, anxiety naturally decreases. Not because you have stopped caring about anything, but because you have stopped attaching your peace to uncertain outcomes. You care about what you can control, which is your present character and choices. Everything else, including whether you will be alive tomorrow, is not up to you. The Stoics had a technical term for this acceptance of what is not up to you. They called it amor fati, love of fate. It means accepting and even embracing what happens, not because you are passive or resigned, but because what happens is simply reality, and fighting against reality is futile and painful. You can prefer one outcome over another and work toward what you prefer, but ultimately what happens is not entirely within your control. Death is the ultimate example of this. You can prefer to live rather than die. You can take reasonable steps to protect your life, but you cannot control whether you will live or die any more than you can control the weather. Death will come when it comes. Fighting against this fact, resenting it, denying it, fearing it constantly, none of these responses change the fact or make your life better. They only make you suffer now, in addition to the eventual death that will come regardless. The alternative is acceptance, not passive resignation or giving up on life, but clear-eyed acknowledgement of reality. You will die. Everyone will die. This is how things are. Fighting against it is like fighting against gravity or the passage of time. It accomplishes nothing except to make you miserable. Accepting it, truly accepting it, creates the space for peace. This peace is not the absence of feeling or the suppression of emotion. The Stoics were not advocating for emotional numbness or detachment. Marcus Aurelius grieved when his children died. Seneca wept when friends passed away. Epictetus felt the pain of his physical limitations. They were fully human, fully feeling, but they did not add unnecessary suffering on top of unavoidable pain. They did not rage against the nature of existence or demand that reality be different than it was. There is a crucial distinction here between pain and suffering. Pain is inevitable. It is part of being a living creature with a body and attachments. You will experience physical pain, emotional pain, loss, disappointment, grief. None of this can be avoided entirely. Suffering, however, is largely optional. Suffering comes from resisting pain, from insisting that it should not be happening, from telling yourself stories about how unfair or terrible it is that you must experience this. Death is similar. The end of your life is unavoidable. That is pain in the sense that it involves loss. But the suffering around death, the fear and anxiety and dread that many people carry for decades, this is optional. It comes from resisting the inevitable, from demanding that reality be different than it is. The Stoics practiced releasing this resistance, accepting death as natural, and thereby eliminating the suffering while acknowledging the reality of loss. This is what makes Memento Mori a practice of peace rather than a practice of despair. You are not dwelling on death in order to make yourself sad or scared. You are acknowledging death in order to stop being controlled by the fear of it, in order to release the suffering that comes from denying the inevitable, in order to fully inhabit your life while you have it. Think of it like this. Imagine you are at a beautiful park on a perfect day. You could spend the entire time worrying about the fact that the day will end, that eventually you will have to leave the park, that the sun will set and the experience will be over. This worry would prevent you from enjoying the park while you are there. It would not stop the day from ending. It would only ensure that you suffer during the experience rather than enjoying it. The alternative is to know that the day will end, to accept that fully, and precisely because you know it will end, to engage with it fully while it lasts. To notice the quality of the light, the feel of the grass, the sounds of birds, the pleasure of being alive and aware in this moment. The knowledge that it will end does not diminish the experience. It enhances it because you are not taking it for granted or assuming you can always come back later. Your life is like this day in the park. It will end. You do not know when, but you know that it is temporary. You can spend your life worrying about its end, or you can accept its end and fully inhabit it while it lasts. The Stoics unequivocally recommend the latter, not as a moral imperative but as practical wisdom. One approach creates suffering without preventing death. The other creates peace and full engagement with life without denying death. The Stoics believed that virtue was sufficient for happiness. This is a strong claim. They meant that if you are living with wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, you are living well, regardless of external circumstances. Whether you are rich or poor, healthy or sick, admired or ignored, you can be happy if you are virtuous. And you can be virtuous right up until the moment of death, which means you can be happy right up until that moment. This is radically different from most modern conceptions of happiness, which depend heavily on circumstances. We think we will be happy when we get the job, the relationship, the house, the achievement. We make our happiness conditional on external things that are not fully within our control. The Stoics point out that this makes happiness essentially impossible, because external things are always uncertain and temporary. Even if you get what you want, you can lose it, and you will certainly lose it when you die. But if happiness comes from virtue, from being a person of character and wisdom, then it is available always, regardless of circumstances. You can lose everything external and still maintain your inner character. You can face death itself and still be wise and courageous in how you face it. Nothing external can take virtue from you unless you give it up yourself. This is the inner citadel that Marcus Aurelius wrote about. It is the fortress of your character and rational mind that remains impregnable to external circumstance. Everything else can be taken from you. your possessions, your status, your relationships, your health, your life itself. But your capacity for virtue, your ability to choose wisdom over foolishness, courage over cowardice, justice over injustice, this remains yours as long as consciousness remains. And when consciousness ends, the need for virtue ends as well. You are safe either way. As we move deeper into our exploration of death and its place in a well-lived life, we encounter something that may at first seem paradoxical. The Stoics did not turn toward mortality from a place of despair or nihilism. They turned toward it with clear eyes and steady hearts, believing that an honest reckoning with our finite nature was not the beginning of darkness but the beginning of wisdom. This is the heart of what we are examining together tonight. Not death as an ending that diminishes life, but death as a truth that illuminates it. The practice of Memento Mori, of remembering death, was woven into the fabric of Roman Stoic life in ways both grand and intimate. When a victorious general returned to Rome and was granted a triumph, parading through the streets while crowds cheered and threw flowers, a slave would stand behind him in the chariot. The slave's single duty was to whisper in the general's ear throughout the procession, "Remember, you are mortal." In the very moment of his greatest glory, surrounded by adulation and power, the general was reminded of his human limitations. This was not cruelty. It was clarity. It was protection against the corrosive force of hubris, against the dangerous illusion that success makes us something other than human. This practice reveals something essential about the Stoic understanding of death. They did not seek to be reminded of mortality in order to feel small or worthless. They sought it to remain grounded in truth. The general was still celebrated. The triumph still mattered. But his humanity remained intact because he held simultaneously both his achievement and his mortality. This is the balance the Stoics sought. Not the denial of death through distraction, nor the obsessive fixation on death that poisons the present moment. Rather, a steady awareness that holds life and death together in a single, clear vision. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his personal journals that would later become the Meditations, returned again and again to this theme. He reminded himself that he would die, that everyone he loved would die, that empires would fall and names would be forgotten. He did not write these things once and consider the matter settled. He returned to them throughout his life because he understood that the human mind has a powerful tendency to forget what is uncomfortable. We naturally drift toward the illusion of permanence. We plan as though we have infinite time. We put off what matters. We invest heavily in things that will not endure. And so the practice of Memento Mori was not a one-time realization but an ongoing discipline, a regular return to the truth that clarifies everything else. Consider the nature of what happens when we forget our mortality. Without that steady awareness, our perspective gradually distorts. Small problems begin to feel enormous. Minor slights become major offenses. We delay conversations we should have, assuming there will always be another chance. We accumulate possessions we do not need, as though building a fortress against time itself. We hold grudges that poison years of our lives. We wait for the perfect moment to begin living as we truly wish to live, not realizing that we are spending the only currency that matters, spending it on things we do not value, simply because we have not clearly seen that the spending must eventually end. The Stoics observed this pattern of delusion and recognized it as one of the primary sources of human suffering. When we live as though we are permanent, we betray ourselves. We make choices that our wiser, clearer selves would never make. We allow fear of judgment to silence us, as though the opinions of others were eternal monuments rather than passing thoughts. We chase status and recognition, building elaborate structures of identity that time will erase as surely as wind erases footprints in sand. And because we have not looked directly at our own impermanence, we are shocked and devastated when loss arrives. We are unprepared for the very thing that was always certain. Seneca wrote extensively about time and how we squander it. He observed that people guard their property zealously but allow their time to be stolen freely. They would never permit someone to take their money without protest, yet they allow their years to be consumed by obligations they do not value, by people who drain rather than nourish them, by pursuits that bring neither joy nor meaning. Why this strange inconsistency? Seneca's answer was clear. We guard what we perceive as limited. We spend freely what we imagine we have in abundance. And most people live with an unexamined assumption of abundant time. Death is something that happens to others, something far away, something for later concern. This comfortable delusion allows us to waste the irreplaceable. The practice of remembering death, then, is fundamentally a practice of remembering value. When we hold clearly in mind that our time is finite, that this day is one of a limited number, that this conversation may be among the last we have with this person, everything sharpens into focus. The trivial reveals itself as trivial. The important becomes unmistakable. We stop waiting for permission or perfect conditions. We stop rehearsing for a life we will someday live and recognize that this, right now, is the life we are living. This is not morbid. This is awake. This is the clarity the Stoics sought through their daily practice of Memento Mori. To understand the Stoic approach to death more fully, we need to examine what they meant by living in accordance with nature. This phrase appears throughout Stoic writing, and it can seem at first like a vague aspiration, perhaps something about appreciating trees and living simply. But for the Stoics, living in accordance with nature was a precise philosophical principle, and mortality was central to it. Nature, in Stoic thought, referred to the fundamental character of reality, the way things actually are beneath our preferences and wishes. And one of the most fundamental truths of nature is impermanence. Everything that comes into being passes out of being. Everything that is born dies. This is not a flaw in the design. It is the design. To live in accordance with nature, then, means to live in harmony with impermanence rather than in resistance to it. It means accepting mortality not as an unfortunate exception to how things should be, but as an essential part of how things are. When we resist this truth, when we demand permanence from an impermanent world, we create a fundamental disharmony within ourselves. We set ourselves against reality, and reality always wins that contest. This is the source of so much human anguish. Not death itself, but our refusal to accept death. Not change itself, but our demand that things remain unchanged. Not loss itself, but our belief that we should be able to keep forever what we love. The Stoics saw this clearly. They recognized that suffering comes not from events but from our judgments about events, and the judgment that mortality is wrong, that impermanence is a mistake, that we should be exempt from the conditions that govern all living things. This judgment creates endless suffering. Marcus Aurelius often reflected on the cycles of nature as a way of understanding human life. He observed seeds germinating, plants growing, flowers blooming and fading, fruits forming and falling. He watched these cycles not as separate from human existence, but as revealing the pattern within which human existence unfolds. Birth, growth, maturity, decline, death. This is not tragic. This is the way of things. To call it tragic is to stand in judgment of nature itself, to insist that reality is somehow wrong. The Stoic alternative is acceptance, not as passive resignation, but as clear-sighted acknowledgement of what is true. This acceptance does not mean we do not value life or that we become indifferent to loss. This is a crucial distinction that is often misunderstood about Stoicism. The Stoics loved deeply. They cherished their children, their friends, their spouses. They valued their own lives and worked to live well. But they loved and valued within a framework of acceptance. They enjoyed what they had without the added burden of demanding that it last forever. They held what they loved with open hands rather than clenched fists. And this, paradoxically, allowed them to love more fully because they were not constantly haunted by fear of loss. They knew loss was coming. They accepted that, and so they could be fully present with what was here now, rather than anxiously clinging and already grieving what they still possessed. Epictetus taught his students to practice this acceptance in concrete ways. When you kiss your child goodnight, he suggested, remember that your child is mortal. Not to poison the moment with fear, but to make the kiss more conscious, more present, more real. To remove the gauzy veil of assumed permanence and see clearly what is actually here, an unrepeatable moment with a being you love, a being who exists in time and will not be here forever, just as you will not be here forever. This is not morbid. This is awake. This is loving with full awareness rather than in a half-conscious dream of permanence. Consider how this applies to your own life, to this very moment you are experiencing now. You are alive. You are breathing. You have this time right now. This is not practice for some future, more real existence. This is it. This is the life you have, unfolding in real time, moving steadily toward its conclusion. How does it change your experience to hold that clearly? Not as a heavy burden, but as a simple truth. You are alive for a limited time. Therefore, this time matters. These choices matter. This day matters. Not because you need to prove something or achieve something or become someone other than who you are, but simply because it is finite, and finite things have a particular preciousness that infinite things cannot possess. Think of how we value rare things, limited editions, the last of something. We recognize their worth precisely because they are limited. Yet we often fail to apply this same recognition to time itself, which is the most limited resource we possess. We receive a certain allotment, unknown to us in its exact measure, and we are spending it continuously. The Stoics simply asked, should we not spend it consciously? Should we not, knowing its limitation, choose carefully how we use it? Should we not let the fact of its ending inform our decisions about how we live? This is where the practice of Memento Mori becomes intensely practical rather than merely philosophical. When you are deciding whether to hold a grudge or extend forgiveness, remember that you will die. When you are choosing between numbing distraction and meaningful difficulty, remember that your time is finite. When you are postponing a conversation or a dream or a change you know you need to make, remember that you do not have forever. The awareness of death is not meant to paralyze you with fear. It is meant to mobilize you with clarity. It is meant to cut through the fog of indefinite postponement and reveal what actually matters to you. The question naturally arises, if we are going to die anyway, if everything we build will eventually crumble, if everyone we love will be lost, what is the point? Why bother? Why strive? Why care? This is the nihilistic interpretation of mortality, and it is one the Stoics explicitly rejected. They saw the finite nature of life not as a reason for despair, but as the very source of meaning. It is precisely because time is limited that it has value. It is precisely because life ends that how we live matters. Imagine for a moment that you had infinite time, literal eternity stretching before you, an endless sequence of days without conclusion. What would be the urgency of anything? Why read this book today when you could read it next century? Why have this conversation now when you could have it in 1,000 years? Why develop this skill, pursue this relationship, create this work when you have forever? The meaning drains away in the face of infinity. It is limitation that creates significance. It is the frame that makes the picture. Without edges, there is only endless, undifferentiated expanse. The Stoics understood that a good life is not measured in years but in quality, in virtue, in alignment with our highest nature. Seneca made this point emphatically. A life is not shortened if it is well lived, he argued. A person who lives 30 years with wisdom and virtue has lived fully. A person who lives 90 years in confusion and vice has barely lived at all. The question is not how long, but how well. And once we shift to this question, the fact of mortality becomes less oppressive. We are not trying to accumulate infinite years. We are trying to live well with the years we have, however many they may be. This shifts everything. It transforms death from the ultimate defeat into a natural boundary that gives shape to life. Think of how a sonnet is defined by its form, 14 lines with a particular rhyme scheme. Does the limitation to 14 lines diminish the sonnet? No. The constraint is what makes it a sonnet. The poet works within the form, and the form focuses the work. Life is similar. We have a form, a shape, a beginning, and an end. We work within it. The ending does not negate the living. The form focuses the effort. Marcus Aurelius returned to this theme frequently, reminding himself that the length of life is not what matters. He wrote that whether you live 3,000 years or 30,000, you lose the same thing at death, the present moment. Because the present moment is all anyone ever has. The past is gone. The future is not yet here. All we ever possess is now. And at death, we lose now, whether we have had many nows or few. This is not meant to be depressing. It is meant to highlight that the number of years is less important than the quality of presence we bring to the years we have. Consider the alternative, the desperate attempt to extend life indefinitely, to cheat death through denial or through fantasies of immortality. This path leads not to peace but to increasing anxiety, because we cannot actually remove death. We can only refuse to look at it, and what we refuse to look at does not disappear. It haunts us. It governs us from the shadows. It shapes our choices through fear rather than through wisdom. The person who will not acknowledge mortality often becomes enslaved to safety, to comfort, to the illusion of control. They build their life around avoiding risk, which means avoiding fully living. They trade the richness of an examined, courageously lived life for the brittle false security of denial. The Stoics chose differently. They looked directly at death. They integrated it into their daily awareness. And this did not make them reckless or depressed. It made them focused and free. Focused because they had clarity about what mattered. Free because they were not controlled by fear of the very thing that is inevitable. When you have accepted that you will die, when you have truly reckoned with that and made your peace with it, a great deal of fear loses its power over you. Not all fear, the Stoics were not claiming some superhuman transcendence. But much of the fear that governs daily life, fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of loss, these fears become manageable when held against the backdrop of mortality. What is the worst that can happen if you try something and fail? You will be embarrassed. You will be criticized. You will lose status or money or comfort. These things are real and they may be difficult, but they are not death, and you have already accepted death. So the other losses become proportionate. They are temporary difficulties within a temporary life. They are not catastrophes. They are experiences. And if you are going to die anyway, if this life is finite regardless of whether you play it safe or take risks, might you choose to live more boldly? Might you choose to pursue what calls to you rather than what merely keeps you comfortable and afraid? This is the liberating power of Memento Mori. It is not that remembering death makes you careless about life. It is that remembering death helps you distinguish between what truly threatens your well-being and what merely threatens your ego or your comfort. Most of what we fear and avoid is in the latter category. We are not actually in danger. We are simply uncomfortable. But we treat discomfort as though it were danger, and so we construct increasingly narrow lives, avoiding more and more in an attempt to feel safe. The Stoic who remembers death daily does not need this false safety. They have already faced the ultimate limit. Everything else is just details. Seneca pointed out that we are dying from the moment we are born. Each day we are closer to death than we were the day before. This is not meant to be macabre. It is meant to be clarifying. You are not going to start dying someday in the distant future. You are in the process right now. This moment is part of your dying, just as it is part of your living. The two are not separate. To live is to move through time toward death. This is simply what living is. And when we stop dividing our lives into the living part and the imagined future dying part, when we recognize that it is all one continuous process, we stop postponing our real lives. We stop waiting for someday and recognize that today is the day we have. Today is the life we are living. Within the Stoic framework, death also serves as a great equalizer, a truth that cuts across all distinctions of wealth, power, status, and achievement. The emperor and the slave both die. The famous and the forgotten both return to dust. This is not a cheerful thought, perhaps, but it is a leveling one. It reveals the fundamental equality beneath all social hierarchy. And for the Stoics, this equality was not merely an abstract principle. It had direct implications for how one should live and how one should treat others. Marcus Aurelius held supreme power in the Roman world. He commanded armies, governed vast territories, made decisions that affected millions of lives. Yet, in his private writings, he constantly reminded himself of his mortality and his fundamental sameness with all other humans. The beggar on the street and the emperor in the palace are both mortal beings, both subject to fortune, both vulnerable to loss and pain and death. This awareness kept Marcus tethered to his humanity. It prevented the kind of isolation and delusion that power often creates. When you remember that you will die, just as the poorest person in your empire will die, it becomes harder to see yourself as fundamentally different or superior. This has profound implications for how we relate to others. If we are all going to die, if we are all temporary beings moving through a brief span of time, what is the point of the cruelty we inflict on one another? What is the point of the hierarchies we defend so fiercely? What is the point of the judgments and condemnations, the way we other people, the way we create divisions between us and them? We are all in the same condition. We are all mortal. We all face loss, pain, confusion, and death. This shared fate could be a source of compassion rather than competition. The Stoics did not argue for the elimination of all social roles or distinctions. They recognized that societies need structure and that people have different capacities and responsibilities. But they argued that beneath these social arrangements lies a more fundamental reality. We are all human, all rational beings with the same essential nature, all subject to the same ultimate limits. To recognize this is to recognize the basic dignity and worth of every person, not because of their achievements or status, but because of their humanity. And part of that humanity is mortality. When you see another person, you are seeing someone who will die. This simple fact, if held clearly in mind, changes the quality of the encounter. The person who irritates you, who disagrees with you, who has wronged you, they are mortal. Their time is limited, just as yours is. The grudge you hold, the resentment you nurse, the revenge you contemplate, all of this is taking place within the context of two finite lives. Does this change anything for you? Does it soften anything? Does it create any space for perspective? Epictetus taught that when you see someone acting badly, you should remember that they are doing the best they can with their current understanding. They are confused. They do not see clearly, and they, too, will die, probably without ever achieving the clarity they need. This is not a reason to excuse harmful behavior or to fail to protect yourself, but it is a reason for compassion alongside your boundaries. The person who harms you is a mortal being, struggling with existence just as you are, and they will face their own death just as you will. This does not make what they did acceptable, but it makes them human rather than monstrous. Consider your own relationships and how they might shift with this awareness. The people you love will die, not someday in the abstract distant future, but actually, specifically, they will cease to exist. The person you argued with yesterday, the parent you have not called, the friend you have been meaning to contact, they are all mortal. This time you have with them is not permanent. How does it change things to hold that clearly? Does the argument still seem as important? Does the postponed phone call still make sense? Does the grudge still feel worth maintaining? The practice of remembering that others are mortal is not meant to make you constantly sad about inevitable losses. It is meant to help you be present with people while they are here, to listen more carefully, to forgive more readily, to say the things that matter rather than assuming you will have another chance, to choose connection over being right, to prioritize relationship over resentment. The knowledge that someone will die does not diminish your love for them. If anything, it clarifies and intensifies that love, because you recognize its finite nature. Seneca wrote about this in his letters, particularly regarding his own mortality and the mortality of those he cared for. He practiced imagining the death of loved ones, not as a morbid fixation but as a way of appreciating them more fully while they lived. This practice, sometimes called negative visualization or premeditatio malorum, involved deliberately contemplating loss so that you would not take presence for granted. If you imagine that today might be the last time you see someone you love, you tend to be more present with them. You tend to notice them more carefully. You tend to speak more honestly. You tend to forgive more easily. The practice is not about dwelling in fear. It is about waking up to the reality of impermanence so that you do not sleepwalk through your relationships. This extends beyond personal relationships to how we move through the world more generally. Everyone you encounter is mortal. The stranger in line at the store, the person driving slowly in front of you, the coworker who frustrates you, they are all temporary beings with a limited span of time, just like you. They are all carrying their own struggles and confusions. They are all facing their own mortality, whether they acknowledge it or not. To remember this is to move through the world with more patience, more kindness, more recognition of shared humanity. One of the most challenging aspects of mortality for many people is the question of legacy. If we are going to die and be forgotten, what lasting impact can we have? Does anything we do really matter? The Stoics had a nuanced answer to these questions, one that neither promised false immortality through fame nor surrendered to complete meaninglessness. They suggested that the question itself reveals a misunderstanding about where meaning comes from. Marcus Aurelius reflected extensively on fame and legacy in his meditations. He noted that even the most famous people are eventually forgotten. Empires crumble, names fade, The works we think will last forever turn to dust. Even the memory of those who remember us will eventually disappear. If you go back far enough, you reach people whose names we will never know, whose lives are completely erased from the record. They lived and died and are now as though they never existed. This is the fate that awaits everyone, including those we currently consider immortal in fame. Does this make life meaningless? Marcus did not think so. He argued that the desire for lasting fame is itself a kind of confusion. It is an attempt to extend ourselves beyond our natural span, to exist in the future through reputation. But what good does this do the person who has died? They cannot enjoy their fame. They cannot know they are remembered. The fame belongs to those who do the remembering, not to the one remembered. And those remembers, too, will die and be forgotten. So the whole chain of fame eventually ends in oblivion. Why, then, should we live for it? The Stoic alternative is to locate meaning not in legacy but in virtue, not in lasting impact but in present rightness. The question is not whether you will be remembered, but whether you are living well now. Are you acting with justice, wisdom, courage, and moderation? Are you fulfilling your nature as a rational social being? Are you contributing what you can to the common good, not for eternal recognition, but because it is the right thing to do right now? This is where meaning resides, in the quality of your actions and character, not in whether those actions echo through time. Consider the relief in this perspective. You do not have to be great. You do not have to achieve something that will last forever. You do not have to make your mark on history or be remembered by future generations. You simply have to live well according to your own best understanding in the time that you have. The pressure of needing to create some lasting legacy often paralyzes people or drives them to desperate, ego-driven pursuits. The Stoic approach removes that pressure. Do good work because it is good work, not because it will make you immortal. Love people because loving is worthwhile, not because they will remember you forever. Act with integrity because integrity is its own reward, not because it will build a lasting reputation. This does not mean that your actions have no impact beyond yourself. Of course they do. The kindness you show ripples outward. The work you do affects others. The children you raise carry something of you forward. But the Stoics cautioned against attaching to outcomes, especially outcomes far beyond your lifetime. You cannot control whether you will be remembered. You cannot control how your work will be interpreted or used by future generations. You cannot control whether the people you affect will themselves have influence. All of that is outside your power. What is within your power is the choice you make right now about how to act. Epictetus taught the dichotomy of control as a central Stoic principle. There are things up to us and things not up to us. Our own thoughts, intentions, and choices are up to us. Nearly everything else, including the consequences of our actions and certainly including our lasting legacy, is not fully up to us. To invest your peace of mind in things not up to you is to set yourself up for frustration and disappointment. To focus instead on what is up to you is to reclaim your agency and your equanimity. You can choose to act well. Whether that action reverberates through centuries is not your concern. This teaching is deeply freeing once you truly absorb it. You are not responsible for being remembered. You are not responsible for changing the world. You are not responsible for achieving fame or building monuments. You are responsible for the choices you make, the character you develop, the virtue you practice. That is within your domain. Everything else belongs to fortune, to time, to forces beyond your control. And since you will die anyway, since your time is finite, whether you achieve great fame or live in complete obscurity, You might as well focus on what is actually within your power, living well in the present moment. Seneca made a similar point when discussing the shortness of life. He argued that many people complain about how brief life is, yet they waste most of it. They spend years in pursuits that do not matter to them, in relationships that drain them, in worries about things that never happen. And then they lament that they did not have enough time. But they had time. They simply spent it poorly. If you want your life to feel long and full, Seneca suggested, live it deliberately. Focus on what matters. Do not fritter away your days on trivialities and then complain that life is short. Life is long enough if you use it well. This brings us back to mortality as a clarifying force. When you remember that your time is finite, that you cannot do everything or be everything or leave a permanent mark, you are free to choose what actually matters to you, not what should matter according to society or your family or some abstract ideal, but what actually matters to you in your heart when you strip away the pretense and pressure. That is what you have time for. That is what deserves your finite days, not the pursuit of immortal fame, not the accumulation of more than you need, not the approval of people who will themselves be dead soon, but the real, immediate, grounded work of living well, according to your own best lights, in the brief span you have been given. To remember death is also to clarify what we mean when we talk about loss and fear. Much of what we call fear of death is not actually fear of being dead, but fear of dying, fear of pain, fear of losing what we love, fear of the unknown. The Stoics addressed these fears with characteristic directness, neither dismissing them as irrational nor indulging them as inevitable. They examined each fear carefully to understand what was actually at stake and whether the fear itself was causing more suffering than the thing feared. Consider first the fear of dying, the process itself. Many people fear a painful death, and this fear is not unreasonable. Pain is genuinely difficult, but the Stoics pointed out that much of our suffering around pain comes from our resistance to it and our fear of it, not from the pain itself. Pain is a sensation. Suffering is what we add through our judgment that the pain should not be happening, that it is unbearable, that we cannot endure it. When we remove that layer of resistance and face pain simply as a present sensation that we are experiencing, it often becomes more manageable. This is not to suggest that pain is pleasant or that we should seek it. The Stoics were not masochists, but they did cultivate a kind of equanimity toward difficult sensations, a willingness to experience what arises without adding the layer of anguish that comes from fighting reality. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that he had endured pain before and survived it. He noted that pain either ends or it continues until death, at which point it ceases to matter. This may seem cold, but it is also practical. The pain you are in will either get better or it will eventually end with your life. Either way, it is temporary. This knowledge does not remove pain, but it can remove the added suffering of believing the pain is both intolerable and endless. Regarding the fear of losing what we love, the Stoics again applied their framework of acceptance. Everything you love, you will lose. Every person, every possession, every experience, every moment is impermanent. This is not pessimism. This is observation. And the question is whether you will let that fact poison your enjoyment of what you have, or whether you can hold both the love and the inevitable loss without the love being diminished by the loss to come. This is the practice of loving with open hands, of enjoying fully while also accepting that nothing lasts forever. Think of a beautiful sunset. You do not refuse to enjoy it because you know it will end. The ending is part of what makes it beautiful. It is fleeting. It is unrepeatable. This particular configuration of light and cloud and color will never happen again exactly this way. and that makes it precious. The same is true of everything in your life. This day will not come again. This conversation is unique. This moment with this person is one of a finite number. Does the fact that it will end make it less valuable, or does it make it more so? The Stoics argued for the latter. Impermanence is not a bug. It is a feature. It is what creates value in the first place. The fear of the unknown, of what happens after death, occupied less of the Stoics' attention than you might expect. They tended toward the view that death is simply the end of experience, a return to the state of non-being we were in before birth. If that is the case, there is nothing to fear. We do not suffer from the eons of non-existence before we were born. Why would we suffer from the non-existence after we die? It is simply absence. And absence is not painful to the one who is absent. You cannot experience non-existence. If you are experiencing, then you exist. If you do not exist, there is no you to experience anything, including fear or pain or loss. Epictetus, though not a Stoic, made this point in a way the Stoics found compatible with their own thinking. Death, he said, is nothing to us. When we exist, death is not present. When death is present, we do not exist. Therefore, death never actually concerns us because we never coexist with it. We either are or death is, never both. This logical puzzle is not just wordplay. Points to something genuine. The thing we fear does not actually happen to us. We do not experience being dead. We stop experiencing. And the stopping itself is not an experience we endure. For those who believe in an afterlife, the Stoic approach is slightly different but reaches a similar conclusion. If there is continued existence after death, then death is not really death but transition. And if the transition leads to a better state, there is nothing to fear. If it leads to a worse state or to judgment, then living virtuously now is the best preparation, and fear does not help. In either case, whether death is ending or transition, fear of it does not serve you. It does not protect you. It does not prepare you. It only diminishes the life you are living now. This is the key insight that the Stoics return to again and again. Fear of death is a kind of anticipatory suffering, a way of bringing the future into the present and experiencing it as though it were already happening. But it is not happening. Right now, in this moment, you are alive. Death is not here. You are suffering from the thought of death, not from death itself. And the thought is optional. You can acknowledge that you will die without making that acknowledgement into a source of constant anxiety. You can integrate mortality into your worldview without it colonizing your emotional life. This is what the practice of Memento Mori cultivates. Not obsessive fear, but clear acknowledgement that allows you to live more fully. Marcus Aurelius suggested a helpful reflection. He noted that we have all already been non-existent for eternity, all the time before we were born, and that non-existence caused us no distress. We did not suffer during the reign of the dinosaurs. We did not agonize through the building of the pyramids. We simply were not, and being not is not painful. It is nothing. So why should the return to that same state of non-being cause such fear? We are afraid of losing what we have of the transition from being to non-being. But the state itself, the state of not existing, is not actually threatening. It is the same neutral nothingness we emerged from. As we deepen further into the Stoic understanding of mortality, we arrive at what might be the most practical aspect of the teaching. The awareness of death clarifies values. When you hold your mortality clearly in mind, certain things that seemed important begin to seem trivial, and certain things you may have been neglecting reveal themselves as essential. This is not a one-time realization but an ongoing recalibration that the practice of Memento Mori provides. Consider the typical sources of anxiety and stress in modern life. Many of them concern things that will not matter at all when we look back from the perspective of our deathbed. The embarrassment of a social mistake, the frustration of a delayed package, the irritation of traffic, the worry about what someone thinks of you, the resentment over a perceived slight. These things feel significant in the moment, but they are not. They are psychological weather, passing clouds that we mistake for permanent conditions. When you regularly remember that you will die, that your time is genuinely limited, these concerns tend to diminish to their proper size, which is very small indeed. This is not to say that you should ignore your present experience or dismiss your feelings. The Stoics were not advocating for emotional suppression or for pretending that difficulties do not affect you. Rather, they were suggesting that perspective changes experience. When you are stuck in traffic and late for an appointment, that situation is frustrating. But when you add the layer of perspective that comes from remembering mortality, the frustration softens. You are alive. You are in a vehicle traveling from one place to another. This is a brief inconvenience in a brief life. It is not a catastrophe. The appointment, too, is just a moment in time. All of this will pass, and relatively soon you will be dead, and none of this will have mattered nearly as much as it seemed to matter in the moment. This perspective does not make you apathetic or passive. You can still prefer to be on time. You can still work to improve your circumstances. But you are not destroyed by the normal frustrations of existence. You have a mental framework that contains them, that keeps them in proportion. This is one of the gifts of Memento Mori. Provides scale. It reminds you of the larger context within which your daily life unfolds. And that context is mortality, limitation, impermanence. Everything is temporary, including the bad traffic. On the other hand, some things gain importance when viewed through the lens of mortality. Time with people you love becomes more precious when you remember that this time is finite. Not infinite chances for conversation or connection, but a specific, limited number. Do you want to spend those chances distracted, half present, waiting for a better moment? Or do you want to be here now, attentive, engaged, making the most of the unrepeatable present? The awareness of death tends to pull you into presence because presence is all there is. You cannot live in the past or the future. You can only live now. And if you squander now, you are squandering your life because now is what life is made of. Similarly, the work that genuinely matters to you, the contribution you want to make, the way you want to be in the world, these things become more urgent when you remember that you do not have forever. Not urgent in a frantic, stressed way, but urgent in a clear, motivated way. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. You stop requiring that you feel completely ready. You recognize that you will never feel completely ready, and conditions will never be perfect, and you are going to die someday, so you might as well begin. This is the mobilizing power of mortality awareness. It cuts through procrastination and perfectionism by revealing them as forms of denial. You are pretending you have unlimited time. You do not. So what are you waiting for? The Stoics practiced Memento Mori not as a meditation on sadness, but as a tool for living well. Seneca suggested that you live each day as though it were your last, not in the sense of reckless abandon, but in the sense of completeness. What would you do if you knew this were your final day? Would you hold a grudge? Would you stay angry? Would you waste time on trivialities? Would you leave important things unsaid? Probably not. You would forgive. You would reach out. You would say what mattered. You would focus on what was real. The practice is to bring that same clarity to every day, not by pretending you will actually die tonight, but by remembering that you truly do not know when your last day will come. So living with some element of completeness each day is simply wise. Marcus Aurelius frequently reminded himself that this day might be his last. He could be killed in battle or by assassination or by illness. None of us are guaranteed tomorrow. And holding that truth did not make Marcus a fatalist who stopped caring about his responsibilities. He continued to govern, to lead, to work on behalf of the empire. But he did so with a quality of presence and intentionality that came from knowing it might end at any time. He did not take his days for granted. He did not assume he could fix tomorrow what he was avoiding today. He lived with a sense of the preciousness of time, which made him both more effective and more at peace. This is the paradox at the heart of Memento Mori. Remembering death does not make you morbid or depressed if you do it within a Stoic framework. It makes you more alive, more present, more focused on what matters, more appreciative of what you have, more forgiving of small frustrations, more motivated to live according to your values. Death becomes not an enemy but a teacher, not a negation of life but a clarifier of life. The limit creates the meaning, the ending shapes the story, and knowing that the story will end frees you to write it consciously, deliberately, in a way that reflects who you truly want to be. We have traveled quite far together in this long evening of philosophical reflection. We have considered the fundamental nature of mortality, the Stoic perspective on death as a transformation rather than an ending, and the practical wisdom that emerges when we truly accept our finite nature. Now, as we move deeper into this exploration, we turn our attention to something more subtle, more nuanced. We begin to examine not just what death awareness teaches us about life, but how it fundamentally reshapes our relationship with time itself. Time is the medium in which we exist. Every thought, every action, every relationship unfolds within its flow, yet most of us move through our days with only the vaguest awareness of time's passage. We speak of killing time, of time dragging or flying, of having too much or too little of it. But rarely do we stop to consider what time actually means in the context of our mortality. The Stoics understood something profound about this relationship. They recognized that awareness of death is, in essence, awareness of time's true value. Marcus Aurelius returns again and again to this theme in his meditations. He reminds himself that time is the one resource that cannot be replenished, cannot be stored, cannot be recovered once spent. Unlike wealth, which can be earned again, or reputation, which can be rebuilt, time flows in only one direction. Each moment that passes is gone forever. This might seem obvious, almost too simple to warrant reflection. But consider how differently we would live if we truly internalized this truth. Consider how our priorities would shift if we treated each day as the irreplaceable treasure that it actually is. The practice of Memento Mori forces us into direct confrontation with temporal reality. When we remember that we will die, we remember that our time is bounded. There is a first moment and there will be a last moment. Everything we do, everything we are, occurs within that bracket. This bounded nature of our existence is not a limitation imposed from outside. It is not a punishment or a flaw in the design of things. It is simply what it means to be a living creature. And paradoxically, this very limitation is what gives our time its preciousness. Imagine if you possessed infinite time. Imagine if there were always another day, another year, another century to do whatever you wished. What would be urgent? What would matter? When would you choose to tell someone you love them? When would you pursue your deepest aspirations? When would you live fully? The answer, of course, is never. or rather always later. Infinite time drains urgency from existence. It makes every moment equally insignificant because there are always infinitely more moments to come. But we do not have infinite time. We have exactly one lifetime, measured not in some abstract eternity but in days and hours and breaths. The Stoics saw this clearly. Seneca writes about time as if it were the most precious substance in the universe, more valuable than gold or jewels or power. He observes that we guard our material possessions jealously, going to great lengths to protect what is ours, yet we allow our time to be stolen by anyone who asks for it. We give away hours to pointless obligations, to entertainment that does not truly satisfy us, to worries about things we cannot control. We treat time as if it were abundant when it is actually the scarcest resource we possess. The awareness of mortality changes this calculus entirely. When you truly absorb the fact that your days are numbered, that there will come a last conversation, a last sunrise, a last moment of consciousness, you begin to relate to time differently. Not with panic or desperate grasping, but with clarity about what matters. You begin to distinguish between how you want to spend your finite hours and how you have been spending them. You start to notice where your time goes, who and what receives it, whether the exchange feels worthy of the irreplaceable resource you are trading. This is not about becoming obsessively productive or filling every moment with achievement. The Stoic perspective on time is far more nuanced than that. It recognizes that rest has value, that leisure has value, that quiet contemplation has value. What lacks value is unconscious time, sleepwalking time, time spent without awareness or intention. When Seneca criticizes how people waste their lives, he is not condemning relaxation or simple pleasures. He is pointing to the tragedy of people who arrive at the end of their days and realize they were never truly present for them, never truly alive in their own lives. Death awareness awakens us from this sleepwalk. It brings us into direct contact with the present moment by reminding us that present moments are all we ever truly have. The past is gone, its moments spent, its opportunities either seized or lost. The future is uncertain, never guaranteed, always beyond our direct control. The only time that is actually real, actually ours, actually available for living is now. This breath, this moment of awareness, reading these words or hearing these ideas. Marcus Aurelius understood this with exceptional clarity. As Emperor of Rome, he was surrounded by people wanting his time, demanding his attention, pulling him in countless directions. The pressures on him were immense, yet he maintained his philosophical practice, returning again and again to the recognition that each day might be his last. This was not morbid obsession. It was a technique for staying present, for maintaining perspective, for remembering what truly mattered amid the chaos of responsibility and power. He writes about the importance of completing each action as if it were your last. Not in the sense of making everything dramatic or final, but in the sense of giving it full attention, doing it with care and presence, not treating it as mere prelude to something else. So often we move through our days in a state of perpetual anticipation. We endure the present moment because we are focused on some future moment we believe will be better, more real, more worth our attention. We will be happy when we finish this task, when we reach that milestone, when we achieve that goal. But the future never quite arrives. It always remains future, always just ahead, while the present continues to slip through our fingers unnoticed and unlived. The Stoic practice of Memento Mori disrupts this pattern of perpetual postponement. When you remember that death could come today, this very day, the question becomes urgent. Is this how you want to be spending these precious hours? Not in some abstract sense, not according to someone else's values or society's expectations, but according to your own deepest understanding of what makes a life worth living. This question has weight to it. It requires honest reflection, and it often reveals a significant gap between how we are living and how we wish to be living. This gap is important to acknowledge without judgment. Most of us are living somewhat unconsciously, following scripts we inherited or adopted without much examination. We pursue goals we think we should pursue, maintain relationships out of habit or obligation, fill our time with activities that we have never seriously questioned. This is not moral failure. It is simply the default mode of human existence. We are creatures of habit, social beings influenced by our culture and context, finite minds unable to hold everything up for examination simultaneously. But awareness of mortality gives us the opportunity to question these defaults, to examine whether our actual lives align with our deepest values. Consider your typical day. Not an ideal day, not a special day, but an ordinary day that represents how you actually live. Where does your time go? What receives your attention, your energy, your care? What do you think about during the moments when your mind is not occupied with immediate tasks? What do you look forward to? What do you dread? What do you avoid? These questions are not meant to induce guilt or shame. They are simply tools for seeing clearly, for bringing unconscious patterns into conscious awareness. Now ask yourself, if you knew this ordinary day were your last, what would change? What would suddenly seem important that you have been neglecting? What would seem trivial that you have been taking too seriously? Who would you want to speak with? What would you want to say? How would you move through those final hours? The answers to these questions reveal something profound about your actual values. Not the values you think you hold or wish you held, but the values expressed in how you choose to live when you are reminded of life's fragility. For some, the answer involves relationships. We realize we have been taking for granted the people we love most, assuming they will always be there, always be available, always be willing to reconnect. Death awareness reminds us that this is not guaranteed. Every conversation might be the last conversation. Every goodbye might be final. This recognition does not make relationships anxious or clingy. Rather, it invites us to be more present in them, more honest, more willing to express what we truly feel. It dissolves petty resentments by revealing how small they are against the backdrop of mortality. It encourages forgiveness, not as a moral obligation, but as a liberation from carrying unnecessary weight during our brief journey. For others, the answer involves purpose or calling. We realize we have been deferring our deepest aspirations, waiting for the right time, the right circumstances, the right level of preparation. Death awareness cuts through this deferral. It asks, if not now, when? It reveals that perfect conditions will never arrive, that we will never feel completely ready, that waiting for certainty is simply another form of avoidance. Whatever we wish to create, contribute, or become, the time for it is now, in whatever imperfect circumstances we actually inhabit. Not someday, not when things settle down. Now, still others discover that death awareness brings a quality of simplicity to life. So much of what we worry about, strive for, and argue about seems suddenly less important when viewed from the perspective of our mortality. The Stoics call these matters indifference, things that have no bearing on the only questions that truly matter. Are we living with wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation? Are we cultivating our character? Are we treating others well? Are we present to our own existence? Wealth, reputation, comfort, status, these things are neither good nor bad in themselves. They are simply circumstances, preferred perhaps, but not essential to a life well lived. This Stoic distinction between what truly matters and what is merely preferred helps us navigate the complexity of being human without becoming paralyzed or cynical. We can care about our work, our relationships, our projects, and our goals while simultaneously recognizing that our fundamental worth does not depend on any particular outcome. We can pursue success without being destroyed by failure. We can love deeply without being shattered by loss. We can engage fully with life while maintaining a core of tranquility that remains undisturbed by external circumstances. Death awareness supports this capacity for engaged detachment. When we remember that everything is temporary, including ourselves, we can hold our attachments more lightly. This does not mean loving less or caring less. It means loving and caring without the desperate clutching that comes from pretending things are permanent when they are not. It means accepting from the start what we will eventually be forced to accept anyway. That all things change, all things pass, all things return to the elements from which they arose. The Stoics had a practice they called the premeditation of evils, which, despite its ominous name, was really a technique for building psychological resilience. The purpose was not to dwell morbidly on misfortune, but to prepare the mind to reduce the shock and devastation that comes from experiencing something we never allowed ourselves to imagine. By thinking through difficult scenarios in advance, we rob them of some of their power to undo us when they occur. This practice might seem counterintuitive or even harmful by contemporary standards. We are often told to think positively, to visualize success, to avoid negative thoughts. But the Stoic approach recognizes something important, that trying to avoid thoughts of loss or hardship does not prevent loss or hardship from occurring. It only leaves us more vulnerable when they do occur. Better to look squarely at what might happen, to think it through with calm clarity, to prepare our minds and hearts for the full range of human experience. And what is the ultimate loss we must prepare for? The loss of life itself. Death is the one hardship that is absolutely certain to arrive. We do not know when, we do not know how, but we know it will come. To live in denial of this certainty is to remain perpetually unprepared for the defining event of existence. To live in full awareness of it is to develop a kind of readiness, not a grim resignation, but a mature acceptance that allows us to meet our end with equanimity when it arrives. Seneca tells a story about a philosopher who was asked what he thought about while traveling. The philosopher replied that he was thinking about the fact that the journey might end in disaster, shipwreck, bandits, accident. His companion was horrified, asking why he would dwell on such dark possibilities. The philosopher explained that he was not dwelling on them, but simply acknowledging them as real possibilities, preparing his mind so that if something did go wrong, he would not be caught entirely off guard. This is the spirit of the premeditation of evils. Not pessimism, not obsessive worry, but realistic preparation. Applying this same principle to mortality itself, we arrive back at Memento Mori. Remember, you will die. Not someday in the vague, distant future, but possibly soon, possibly today. What does this remembrance accomplish? It strips away illusion. It reveals priorities, clarifies values. It transforms our relationship with time from careless to careful, from unconscious to conscious, from postponing to present. When we remember we will die, we remember to live. But there is a paradox here worth examining carefully. How can thinking about death help us live more fully? How can awareness of ending heighten presence in the middle? The answer lies in understanding that living fully does not mean living frantically, desperately trying to cram experience into every moment. Living fully means living consciously, with awareness, with intention, with presence to what is actually happening right now. And nothing brings consciousness quite like the reminder that consciousness itself is temporary. Think about how you experience something you know you will never experience again. The last day of a vacation, the final meeting with someone moving away, the last time you visit a childhood home before it is sold. Colors seem more vivid, details more noticeable, the present more present. We are awake to what is happening because we know it will not happen again. We pay attention because we cannot take it for granted. Death awareness brings this quality to all of life. When we truly accept that every experience is in some sense a last experience, we will never live this exact day again, never have this exact conversation again, never see this particular sunset again. We begin to pay the kind of attention usually reserved for acknowledged endings. We wake up inside our own lives. We stop sleepwalking through our days, waiting for life to become real later, and recognize that it is real now, it is only now, it will only ever be now. This shift in awareness does not require dramatic changes in external circumstances. You can continue doing much of what you are already doing. The change is internal, perceptual, a matter of how you relate to your experience rather than what your experience contains. You might still go to the same work, maintain the same relationships, engage in the same activities. But the quality of your engagement transforms when you do these things with full awareness that they are part of your one precious life, unfolding in the only time you actually have. The Stoics practiced this transformation of awareness systematically. They built it into their daily routines through practices of morning preparation and evening reflection. Upon waking, they would remind themselves of the day's mortality and their own, setting an intention to live with wisdom and virtue regardless of what circumstances arose. Upon sleeping, they would review the day, examining their actions and reactions, acknowledging where they aligned with their values and where they fell short, using this reflection not for self-recrimination but for learning and growth. These practices created a framework for conscious living. They prevented days from blurring together into undifferentiated time. They maintained awareness of life's preciousness even amid routine and repetition. They kept the practitioner in dialogue with fundamental questions. How do I want to live? What matters most? Am I being the person I wish to be? These questions, asked regularly with genuine openness, prevent the drift into unconsciousness that characterizes so much of human life. We might adapt these ancient practices to our own context. Perhaps in the morning, before the day's demands press in, we take a few moments to reflect on mortality. Not morbidly, not with fear or dread, but simply acknowledging, I am alive today, and one day I will not be. This life is temporary. This day is temporary. How do I want to meet it? What matters today? What do I want to remember about how I lived this day? Such reflection need not take long. Even a few minutes can establish a different quality of awareness, can shift us from reactive mode to intentional mode. And perhaps in the evening before sleep, we review. What happened today? How did I respond to what arose? When was I present? When was I lost in distraction or worry? When did I act in accordance with my deepest values? When did I fall short? This reflection is not about judgment or perfectionism. We are not trying to live flawlessly. We are simply trying to live consciously, to learn from experience, to gradually become more skillful at being human. The evening review helps us extract wisdom from the day rather than letting it simply disappear into the past unexamined. These practices of morning preparation and evening reflection create a container for conscious living. They bookend each day with awareness, with intention, with connection to what matters most. Over time, this daily practice shapes character. We become more reflective, more present, more aligned with our values. We stop living on autopilot quite so much. We notice when we are drifting and course correct more quickly. We develop what the Stoics called the inner citadel, a core of stability and wisdom that remains constant even as external circumstances change. The inner citadel is one of the most powerful concepts in Stoic philosophy. Marcus Aurelius writes about it as a kind of fortress within the self, a place of retreat and refuge that cannot be touched by external events. No matter what happens in the outer world, whether fortune favors us or abandons us, whether we experience success or failure, praise or criticism, health or illness, the inner citadel remains secure. This is because it is built not from circumstances, which are always changing, but from principles, from wisdom, from the cultivated capacity to maintain equanimity regardless of what arises. Building this inner citadel is the work of philosophy. It is what all the reading, reflecting, and practice are ultimately for. We are not accumulating knowledge for its own sake. We are transforming ourselves, strengthening our capacity to remain grounded in wisdom regardless of circumstances. And death awareness is central to this transformation. When we truly accept our mortality, many things that once seemed threatening lose their power over us. We recognize that the worst that can happen is that we die a bit sooner or later than we might have otherwise. Since death is inevitable anyway, and since we cannot control its timing with any precision, this recognition removes much of fear's leverage. This is not a grim or depressing thought. It is actually profoundly liberating. If we cannot ultimately avoid death, then what is there to fear? Pain, yes, pain is real and we naturally seek to avoid it. Loss, yes, loss is difficult and we naturally grieve. But the existential terror that lurks beneath so much human anxiety, the sense that annihilation is somehow wrong or unfair or a cosmic mistake, this dissolves when we see death clearly as a natural transformation, as much a part of life's pattern as birth, growth, or change. The Stoics went further, suggesting that a life lived well could make death feel almost welcome when it arrives. Not that we should seek death prematurely or carelessly, but that we should live in such a way that when death comes, we can meet it without regret. This means living fully while we can, aligning our actions with our values, treating others well, cultivating wisdom and virtue. If we do these things, then whenever death comes, whether in youth or old age, suddenly or gradually, we can face it with the knowledge that we lived as well as we knew how with the time we were given. Seneca writes about this explicitly, noting that the length of life matters far less than its quality. Someone who lives to 90 while sleepwalking through their days has, in a meaningful sense, barely lived at all. Someone who lives to 40 while fully awake and present to their existence has lived richly, completely, well. We cannot control how much time we receive. That is up to fortune, to the countless causes and conditions beyond our influence. What we can control is how we use whatever time we have. We can waste it or honor it. We can sleep through it or wake up to it. We can live in denial of its limits or in full awareness of its preciousness. This teaching is especially relevant in a culture that often measures the value of a life primarily by its duration. We speak of lives cut short, of tragic early deaths, as if length were the primary metric of a life well lived. The Stoic perspective does not diminish the grief of early death or the sadness of unfulfilled potential, but it does complicate the simple equation of longer equals better. Quality matters. Consciousness matters. Character matters. Someone who lives 30 years with deep presence, kindness, courage, and wisdom has achieved something remarkable, something that is not negated by the fact that they might have lived longer in different circumstances. How then do we wake up? How do we move from unconscious living to conscious living? The first step is simply noticing our current state. Most of us drift through much of our lives on autopilot, reacting to circumstances rather than responding from conscious choice, repeating patterns without examining them, following scripts without questioning whether they serve us. The very fact that you are engaging with these ideas right now is itself a form of waking up. You are stepping back from the current of daily life to reflect on how you are living, to consider whether how you are living aligns with how you wish to live. The second step is practice. Insight alone is rarely sufficient to change deeply ingrained habits. We need regular, repeated engagement with the principles and practices that support conscious living. This is why philosophy for the Stoics was never merely theoretical. It was a daily discipline, a way of life, a set of practices that shaped character over time through consistent application. Reading about wisdom does not make one wise. Thinking about virtue does not make one virtuous. Actually practicing wisdom and virtue in real situations with real stakes through repeated effort over time, this is what transforms us. The practices do not need to be complicated or time-consuming. Simple daily reflection on mortality, as we have discussed, can be profoundly transformative. So can the practice of examining our judgments and reactions, asking whether our interpretations of events are the only possible interpretations or whether we are adding unnecessary suffering through how we think about what happens. The Stoics understood that much of human distress comes not from events themselves but from our judgments about events, and that by becoming aware of our judging process, we can gradually learn to respond with more wisdom and less reactivity. Consider a difficult situation in your own life. Perhaps a relationship conflict, a professional setback, a health challenge, a financial pressure. Now consider how you typically think about this situation. What story do you tell about it? What meaning do you assign to it? What emotions arise when you think about it? Notice that the situation itself is one thing, but your interpretation of it is something additional, something you bring to the situation. This interpretation is not fixed or inevitable. It is constructed through your thinking, shaped by your beliefs and assumptions, influenced by your past experiences and future expectations. The Stoic insight is that we have more influence over our interpretations than we typically realize. We can examine our habitual ways of thinking and ask whether they serve us. We can consider alternative interpretations that might be equally valid but less distressing. We can practice seeing difficulties as opportunities for developing character rather than as pure misfortunes. This is not about denying reality or pretending everything is fine when it is not. It is about recognizing the gap between what happens and what we make it mean, and learning to work skillfully within that gap. Death awareness supports this practice by providing perspective. When we remember our mortality, many situations that seemed overwhelming begin to seem more manageable. We ask ourselves, will this matter on my deathbed? Will I look back on this moment and wish I had spent so much energy worrying about it? Will this conflict, this disappointment, this setback still seem significant against the backdrop of an entire life? Often the answer is no. Not because the situation is not real or does not matter at all, but because it is smaller than we were making it, less threatening than it seemed, more workable than we believed. This shift in perspective is not about minimizing genuine difficulties. Life includes real hardships, real losses, real suffering. The Stoics were not naive optimists who pretended everything was fine. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations while leading military campaigns on Rome's frontiers, dealing with plague, warfare, political intrigue, and personal losses. Seneca lived through exile, political danger, and ultimately a forced suicide. Epictetus was a slave who later faced expulsion from Rome. These were men intimately familiar with hardship. Their philosophy emerged not from comfortable circumstances but from direct engagement with life's difficulties. What they discovered was that even in the midst of genuine hardship, we retain agency over how we meet what arises. We cannot control whether we face illness, loss, betrayal, or death, but we can control whether we meet these experiences with dignity, courage, and wisdom, or with bitterness, resentment, and collapse. This control over our inner response is, for the Stoics, the foundation of freedom. External circumstances may constrain us in countless ways, but our inner freedom, the freedom to maintain our values, our character, our philosophical commitments, remains intact as long as we cultivate and protect it. Death awareness deepens this freedom by removing the illusion that we can avoid all difficulty or pain. We cannot. We are mortal beings in a world of change, and suffering is woven into the fabric of embodied existence. But suffering loses some of its sting when we stop being surprised by it, when we accept it as part of what it means to be alive. This acceptance is not resignation or passivity. We still work to reduce suffering where we can, to heal what can be healed, to improve what can be improved. But we do so without the added layer of outrage or disbelief that comes from thinking suffering should not exist or that we personally should be exempt from it. The Stoics had a vivid sense of human life as a brief episode in a vast cosmos that operates according to its own laws, indifferent to our preferences. We are like waves on the ocean, arising for a moment from the water and then returning to it. While we exist as distinct waves, we have the capacity for consciousness, for choice, for cultivating wisdom and virtue. But we cannot change the fundamental nature of the ocean or the fact that waves eventually dissolve back into it. Our task is not to rage against this reality, but to live our brief moment as well as possible, to be the best wave we can be while we exist as a wave. We are not separate from the cosmos but expressions of it. The intelligence that contemplates the stars is made of stardust, atoms forged in ancient supernovas, now arranged in the unlikely pattern we call a human being. When we think, the cosmos thinks through us. When we act with kindness or courage, the cosmos manifests kindness and courage through us. We are how the universe experiences itself from a particular perspective, in a particular place and time. This is not a small thing. It is actually quite remarkable. Death marks the end of this particular perspective, this particular arrangement of matter and consciousness. The atoms that compose us will be recycled into new forms. The consciousness that arose from their arrangement will dissolve back into whatever consciousness arises from, which remains one of existence's profound mysteries. But the fact that this arrangement is temporary does not make it meaningless while it exists. You are here now, conscious, capable of reflection and choice, participant in the extraordinary phenomenon of lived experience. That matters. How you inhabit this moment matters. What you do with your awareness matters. The Stoics encourage us to view death not as a tragedy but as a natural completion. Every story needs an ending. Every symphony requires a final note. Every wave eventually returns to the ocean. The ending does not negate what came before it. Rather, it provides the boundary that makes the middle meaningful. Without death, without ending, nothing would have shape or definition. The fact that your life is bounded by birth and death is what makes it a life, a distinct phenomenon with its own character and meaning. Think about stories you love, novels, films, plays. Part of what makes them meaningful is that they end. The characters face their challenges, make their choices, experience their arc of development, and then the story concludes. We do not feel that the story is negated by ending. We feel that the ending completes it, gives it wholeness, allows us to reflect on its meaning. The same is true of human lives. The fact that we die does not make our living meaningless. It gives our living its significance, its urgency, its particular character as this life, these relationships, these choices, this brief window of consciousness and possibility. When we truly absorb this perspective, something shifts in how we meet our days. There is less grasping, less desperate clinging to circumstances that are inherently impermanent. There is more presence, more capacity to be here now rather than lost in regrets about the past or anxieties about the future. There is more appreciation for what is actually here, the ordinary miracle of being alive, conscious, capable of experience and relationship and meaning-making. These shifts do not happen overnight. They emerge gradually through sustained practice and reflection. But they do emerge and they transform the quality of our living. This transformation is not about reaching some final state of enlightenment where we transcend all difficulty or fear. The Stoic path is more modest and more realistic than that. It is about becoming gradually more skillful at being human, more capable of meeting life's full range with wisdom and equanimity, more aligned with our deepest values even as circumstances change. We will still face challenges, still experience loss, still feel fear and sadness and uncertainty, but we will meet these experiences differently, with more resources, more perspective, more capacity to remain grounded in what matters. Death awareness is central to this capacity. It functions as a kind of reset button, bringing us back to fundamentals when we get lost in the trivial or overwhelmed by the difficult. When we remember we will die, we remember what actually matters. Petty conflicts lose their charge. Status anxieties dissolve. The opinion of strangers seems less important. What remains is what has always been essential. Living with integrity, treating others well, cultivating wisdom, being present to our own existence. These are the things that matter on a deathbed, looking back across a life. These are the things that matter now. Let us consider more deeply what it means to live with integrity. Integrity comes from the Latin word for wholeness, for being undivided. To live with integrity means to align our actions with our values, to be the same person in public and private, to keep our commitments to ourselves and others, to do what we say and say what we mean. This consistency creates a kind of internal coherence that supports psychological well-being. When we live with integrity, we are not at war with ourselves. We are not constantly managing competing stories about who we are. We can meet our own reflection without shame or denial. But living with integrity requires knowing what our values actually are. Many of us carry unexamined values inherited from family, culture, or circumstance. We pursue goals we never consciously chose, measure ourselves against standards we never explicitly adopted, organize our lives around priorities that may not reflect our own deepest wisdom. Death awareness invites a reckoning with this inheritance. It asks, what do you actually value? What do you actually care about? What kind of person do you actually want to be? Not according to someone else's script, but according to your own most authentic understanding. These are not easy questions. They require real reflection, real honesty with ourselves. But they are essential questions if we wish to live intentionally rather than accidentally, to author our own lives rather than simply playing out inherited patterns. The answers may be surprising. You might discover that you care less about certain conventional markers of success than you thought. You might realize that relationships matter more to you than achievements, or that creativity matters more than security, or that integrity matters more than approval. Whatever you discover, the discovery itself is valuable. It gives you a foundation for making choices that align with who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. The Stoics would add that some values are more aligned with human flourishing than others. They argued that wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation, the four cardinal virtues, are not arbitrary preferences but fundamental goods that support living well regardless of circumstances. These virtues are in our control in a way that external outcomes are not. We can always choose to act wisely, justly, courageously, and moderately, even when we cannot control results. This makes virtue a more reliable foundation for well-being than achievement, pleasure, or approval, all of which depend at least partly on factors beyond our control. To live with wisdom means to see clearly, to understand what we can control and what we cannot, to respond to circumstances with intelligence rather than blind reactivity. To live with justice means to treat others fairly, to contribute to the common good, to recognize our interdependence with the human community. To live with courage means to face difficulty without collapsing, to do what is right even when it is hard, to maintain our values under pressure. To live with moderation means to avoid extremes, to find balance between deficiency and excess, to engage with pleasure and pain without being controlled by either. These virtues are not abstract ideals but practical capacities that can be developed through practice. We become wise by practicing wisdom, just by practicing justice, courageous by practicing courage, moderate by practicing moderation. Each situation that arises is an opportunity to strengthen these capacities. Difficulty is not an obstacle to virtue but an opportunity to practice it. This is why the Stoics could face hardship with equanimity. They understood that challenges were occasions for developing character, for becoming more fully the kind of person they wished to be. Death awareness supports this development by clarifying what kind of character we wish to cultivate. If you knew you would die tomorrow, what would you regret not having become? What capacities would you wish you had developed more fully? What virtues would you wish you had practiced more consistently? The answers to these questions point toward your deepest values, toward the person you are called to become. And the remarkable thing is that it is never too late to begin. Even if you have lived most of your life in one way, you can begin right now to live differently, to cultivate different qualities, to move toward greater alignment with your values. This is one of the most hopeful insights of Stoic philosophy. Transformation is always possible because we always retain choice over our inner responses. No matter what has happened in the past, no matter what habits we have formed or mistakes we have made, we can begin again right now. The past cannot be changed, but this moment is alive with possibility. We can choose how we meet it. We can choose what we cultivate within ourselves. We can choose whether to live consciously or unconsciously, with wisdom or with reactivity, with courage or with avoidance. The practice of Memento Mori reinforces this sense of continual renewal. Each morning, when we remember that we will die, we are reminded that today might be our last day. This is not morbid but clarifying. It wipes the slate clean. Whatever happened yesterday, whatever patterns we have been caught in, today is new. Today we can choose differently. Today we can be more present, more kind, more aligned with who we wish to be. And if we stumble, tomorrow, so long as it comes, offers another chance to begin again. This ongoing renewal is very different from perfectionism. Perfectionism insists that we should live flawlessly, that mistakes represent failure. The Stoic approach recognizes that we are imperfect beings engaged in a lifelong process of development. We will make mistakes. We will react unskillfully. We will forget our principles under pressure. What matters is not that we never fall, but that we notice when we do, learn from it, and return to our practice. The path is not straight. It bends and doubles back. But direction matters more than precision. Death awareness helps us maintain this direction because it continually reminds us what we are aiming toward. We are not trying to accumulate possessions, status, or approval. We are trying to live well in the deepest sense, with wisdom, integrity, kindness, and presence. These values remain constant even as circumstances change. They give coherence to a life across time, through both favorable and difficult conditions. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. As emperor, he faced endless demands, crises, and pressures. Yet he returned again and again to the same fundamental questions: how to live, how to respond, what truly matters. His meditations are not theoretical writings but reminders to himself. Philosophy used as an anchor amid complexity. We face our own versions of this challenge. We may not govern an empire, but we navigate busy lives filled with competing demands, difficult relationships, uncertainty, and constant distraction. We, too, risk living reactively, forgetting what matters. Philosophy, practiced seriously, gives us tools for staying grounded and remembering who we wish to be. Among these tools, death awareness may be the most powerful. Nothing clarifies priorities quite like remembering that our time is finite. Nothing brings us into the present like realizing that the present is all we truly have. This is why Memento Mori has endured for centuries. It works. It changes how we experience life. But it only works if we practice it. Understanding an idea intellectually is not enough. We can know that life is short and still waste it. What transforms us is regular practice. Small, consistent acts that gradually reshape our habits of attention and response. The Stoics understood this. They treated philosophy as a daily discipline woven into ordinary life. Morning preparation, evening reflection, ongoing awareness of their judgments and choices. Over time, these practices became natural, forming a steady baseline of clarity even under pressure. This is the promise of sustained philosophical practice. Not sudden enlightenment, but gradual change. Over months and years, perspective shifts. Presence deepens. Priorities clarify. The person who has practiced Memento Mori for a long time moves through the world differently. More grounded, more attentive, more alive. Not because death awareness frightens them, but because it illuminates what it means to live. Having explored the philosophical foundations of Memento Mori and traced its implications through the various dimensions of human experience, we arrive now at a natural turning point in our inquiry. We have considered death not as an ending to be feared, but as a boundary that gives definition to life, much as the frame gives definition to the painting, or the banks give shape and direction to the river. We have examined how the Stoics regarded mortality not with morbid fascination but with clear-eyed acceptance, understanding that to live well requires acknowledging honestly the conditions under which all living occurs. Yet philosophy, if it remains merely theoretical, becomes something like food that is admired but never eaten. It may be beautiful to contemplate, but it provides no nourishment. The Stoics understood this deeply. They were not interested in constructing elaborate systems of thought that existed only in the abstract realm. They sought wisdom that could be applied, teachings that could transform the daily texture of experience, practices that could be woven into the fabric of ordinary life. Marcus Aurelius did not write his meditations as a treatise for other philosophers to debate. He wrote them as reminders to himself, notes on how to live with wisdom and integrity amid the specific challenges he faced. When Seneca composed his letters and essays, he addressed them to friends navigating real difficulties, offering guidance that could be implemented immediately. Epictetus, having lived as a slave before becoming a teacher, spoke from direct experience of how philosophy could sustain the spirit under the harshest conditions. For all of them, the practice of remembering death was not an intellectual exercise but a practical tool. So we turn our attention now to practice, to the question of how the awareness of mortality might actually be integrated into daily life. Not in ways that require withdrawing from the world or adopting an austere lifestyle, but in ways that can be implemented within whatever circumstances you find yourself. The practice of Memento Mori adapts to any situation because it addresses something universal to all human experience. Consider first the simple practice of morning reflection. The day begins, as all days do, with the transition from sleep to waking. This threshold moment offers a natural opportunity for philosophical practice. Before the day's demands assert themselves, before the mind becomes caught up in planning and worry, there exists a brief space of relative clarity. The Stoics recommended using this time to prepare the mind for what lies ahead. Marcus Aurelius would remind himself each morning that he would encounter difficult people during the day ahead. Not to cultivate pessimism, but to avoid the shock and frustration that comes from expecting the world to be other than it is. This is a form of premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. The awareness of mortality functions similarly. To remember gently and without alarm that this day is not guaranteed to be followed by another, that this morning might be among your final mornings, brings a quality of attention to the hours ahead. This is not meant to induce anxiety. Quite the opposite. When you remember that this day, this singular day, is the only one you can be certain of, the day itself becomes more vivid. The stakes of your choices become clearer, not in a way that adds pressure, but in a way that dissolves the trivial concerns that so often dominate attention. The minor annoyance, the small disappointment, the petty grievance, these lose their power to disturb when placed in the context of mortality. You need not engage in elaborate mental exercises. Today is a day of your life. This specific day, with whatever it contains, represents a portion of the limited time you have been given. Whether that time extends for decades more or ends unexpectedly soon, you cannot know. What you can know is that this day is real and present, and how you meet it matters. From this foundation, the day proceeds differently. Not dramatically so, perhaps. You do not suddenly transform into someone unrecognizable. But there may be a subtle shift in how you inhabit your hours. The task before you might be approached with greater presence, not because it has become more important in any objective sense, but because you are more aware of the preciousness of the time in which you perform it. Throughout the day, opportunities arise to return to this awareness. Not constantly, not obsessively, but periodically. When you notice yourself becoming frustrated with a traffic delay, the awareness of mortality provides perspective. This delay, which seems so important and frustrating, is occupying minutes of a finite life. The frustration itself is occupying your limited attention, your irreplaceable consciousness. Is this how you wish to spend this particular fragment of your existence? Again, this is not about suppressing natural emotions or pretending frustration does not arise. The Stoics were not advocating for robotic detachment from feeling. They were suggesting that we examine our reactions and consider whether they serve us well. Frustration in traffic changes nothing about the traffic. It only disturbs your inner state. Recognizing this, you might find that the frustration loosens its grip, not through forced positive thinking, but through simple recognition of what is within your control and what is not. The dichotomy of control, that foundational Stoic principle, becomes easier to apply when viewed through the lens of mortality. When you are vividly aware that your time and attention are limited, you become more discriminating about where you invest them. The traffic is not within your control. Your response to the traffic is, given that you have limited time and limited emotional energy, spending it on frustration about unchangeable circumstances seems suddenly absurd. Consider the practice of evening reflection, which the Stoics also recommended. Seneca advised reviewing the day before sleep, not to catalog failures and shortcomings, but to learn from experience. This practice gains particular depth when combined with the awareness of mortality. As the day ends, you might take a few quiet moments to acknowledge that this day, whatever it contained, is now complete. It has joined the past and cannot be relived. This recognition brings a gentle weight to each day, not a burden but a significance. The day that has passed has used a portion of your finite allotment. Whether it was used well or poorly, it is now gone. This need not provoke regret, though. The Stoics understood that regret about the past serves no useful purpose. What has happened is now among the things that are not within your control. But the recognition that a day has passed, that you are one day closer to your eventual death, can inform how you approach tomorrow. In this evening reflection, you might ask yourself simple questions. Did I live today in a way that reflects what matters most to me? Did I treat others with the kindness and respect that I wish to embody? When I encountered difficulties, did I respond with wisdom or react with impulse? Not to judge yourself harshly, but to observe honestly. This honest observation, conducted with the awareness that your days are numbered, becomes a powerful teacher. You might notice patterns. Perhaps you habitually respond to certain situations in ways that, upon reflection, do not align with how you wish to live. The person who speaks to you dismissively triggers automatic defensiveness. The unexpected change in plans provokes disproportionate frustration. The small mistake generates harsh self-criticism. These patterns, when observed clearly and repeatedly, begin to lose their automatic quality. The space between stimulus and response, which Viktor Frankl would later write about, starts to open. The awareness of mortality widens this space. When you remember that you will die, that your time for growth and change is limited but real, you become more motivated to work with these patterns rather than simply repeating them. Not from a place of anxious urgency, but from a place of sincere care for how you are living. You have this one life, these finite days. Do you wish to spend them in patterns of reactivity that bring neither you nor others any benefit? This question is not rhetorical. It deserves your genuine consideration. The Stoics believed that we possess the capacity to change, to learn, to grow in wisdom regardless of our age or circumstances. But this growth requires attention and intention. It requires noticing what is actually happening in our experience rather than moving through life on autopilot. And the awareness of death, paradoxically, serves as one of the most effective means of waking up to life. Consider the practice of viewing daily activities through the lens of impermanence. This practice can be applied to anything, from the most mundane task to the most significant encounter. When you wash dishes, aware that you will not always be here to wash dishes, the task may take on a different quality. Not that it becomes profound or transcendent necessarily, but it becomes real. You are here now, hands in warm water, engaging in this simple act of maintenance and care. When you speak with someone, aware that either you or they could die before another conversation becomes possible, your attention may shift. The conversation is no longer one of countless interchangeable interactions. It is this specific exchange, happening now, between two mortal beings who have temporarily overlapped in space and time. What is said matters. How you listen matters. The quality of presence you bring matters. This does not mean every conversation must be deep or serious. Light conversation, humor, casual connection. These two are part of human life and have their own value. But even in lightness, there can be presence. You can be genuinely there, attentive to the person before you, aware that this moment will not come again. The awareness of mortality does not make everything heavy. Sometimes it makes things lighter by freeing you from the illusion that you have unlimited time to connect, to express appreciation, to show care. The Stoics practice prosoke, a Greek term that means attention or vigilance. It refers to a quality of awareness, a commitment to remain awake to what is actually happening rather than being lost in distraction or habit. Memento Mori supports prosoke. When you remember death, you remember to pay attention to life. Not with grim determination, but with a kind of tender alertness. Life is brief and precious. Therefore, it deserves your attention. This attentiveness extends to your own inner life as well. The Stoics spoke of maintaining one's inner citadel, that place of reason and will that remains free even when outer circumstances are constrained. Remembering mortality reinforces the importance of this inner work. You cannot control how long you live, but you can influence the quality of your inner life during whatever time you have. You can cultivate equanimity, compassion, wisdom, courage. You can work to free yourself from destructive patterns of thought and emotion. Epictetus, who experienced slavery and physical disability, demonstrated that inner freedom is possible under any external conditions. But this freedom is not automatic. It must be cultivated through practice, through repeated choice, through daily effort. The awareness that your time to develop this freedom is limited can serve as motivation. Not the anxious motivation of looming deadline, but the sincere motivation of someone who values something deeply and wishes to honor it. This is not about suppressing anger or pretending you feel only compassion. It is about creating space for choice. The anger may still arise. That is natural, but you need not be controlled by it. You can feel the anger, recognize it, and then choose your response. And the awareness of mortality helps clarify what response aligns with how you wish to have lived when your life is eventually reviewed in totality. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we should act and speak as if each action and word might be our last. This is not meant to make us overly cautious or paralyze us with the weight of significance. Rather, it is meant to help us act with integrity. If this were your last day, would you want to have spent it nursing petty resentments? Would you want your final words to have been harsh and unkind? Would you want your last actions to have been motivated by ego and appearance rather than genuine value? These questions have clarifying power. They cut through the elaborate justifications we construct for behavior that, in our quieter moments, we recognize as unworthy of us. The awareness of death functions like a simple test. Imagine you were to die tonight. Looking back on today, would you feel at peace with how you lived these hours? If the answer is yes, you are likely living in alignment with your deepest values. If the answer is no, that recognition itself is valuable. It shows you where adjustment is needed. This might sound like it would create constant pressure to live perfectly, to never make mistakes or fall short of your ideals. But this is not the intention. The Stoics understood that humans are imperfect by nature, that we will stumble and err, that progress in wisdom is gradual and uneven. What matters is the direction of travel, not the achievement of some imaginary perfection. When you remember your mortality, you are reminded that you will die before you become perfect. This is simply a fact. Death will come while you are still growing, still learning, still making mistakes. Recognizing this can actually reduce pressure rather than increase it. You need not achieve some flawless state before you die. You need only to have lived as well as you could, to have made genuine effort, to have moved toward wisdom even if you never fully arrived. Consider the practice of gratitude in light of mortality. Gratitude has become something of a cliché in contemporary culture, often reduced to superficial lists or forced positivity. But genuine gratitude, the kind the Stoics cultivated, is something deeper. It is a recognition of the improbable gift of existence, the recognition that you did not earn or deserve this life, that it came to you by chance, and that it will be taken away. Each morning that you wake is not guaranteed by any law of nature. Your continued existence depends on countless factors beyond your control: the functioning of your body, the stability of your environment, the absence of any number of possible catastrophes. That you are here, conscious and capable of experience, is remarkable. The awareness of mortality makes this remarkable nature visible. You can take life for granted, assuming it will continue indefinitely, or you can recognize its contingency and feel genuine appreciation for each day you receive. This gratitude is not the same as happiness or contentment with all circumstances. You might be facing difficulties, illness, loss, frustration. Gratitude does not require pretending these challenges do not exist or do not matter. Rather, it is the recognition that despite challenges, you are still here, still capable of experience, still able to respond with whatever wisdom you can muster. Even a difficult day is, in some fundamental sense, a gift compared to the permanent absence of experience that death represents. The Stoics practiced what we might call negative visualization, imagining the loss of things they valued. This was not to cultivate anxiety, but to disrupt the taking of things for granted. When you imagine, vividly but briefly, what life would be like without something or someone important to you, that thing or person becomes more vivid when you return to ordinary awareness. The water you drink, the shelter you inhabit, the people you love, none of these are guaranteed. All could be lost. Recognizing this, their present existence becomes more precious. The awareness of your own death is perhaps the ultimate negative visualization. You imagine, as concretely as you can, that you will one day no longer exist, that all your concerns and plans will end, that the world will continue without you. This imaginative exercise, uncomfortable as it might be, has the power to reframe your relationship with present experience. If you will one day have no experience at all, then present experience, whatever it contains, has value simply by virtue of existing. When you are with someone you love, aware of mortality, both yours and theirs, the quality of your presence may deepen. You are not guaranteed another moment with this person. They could die. You could die. This present moment is the only one that is real and certain. Therefore, being genuinely here, attentive and open, becomes more important than whatever else you might accomplish. The emails can wait. The tasks can be postponed. This person, this connection, this moment of shared existence, this is irreplaceable. The practice of Memento Mori can also inform how you handle conflict and disagreement. When you remember that both you and the person you are in conflict with are mortal, temporary beings, the conflict itself may be viewed differently. Whatever the disagreement is about, is it worth spending your limited life force on hostility and division? Are you so certain of your position that you are willing to let someone die while you are in conflict with them, or to die yourself with the relationship unrepaired? This is not to say that all disagreements should be avoided or that genuine principles should be abandoned for the sake of harmony. Sometimes standing firm is necessary. Sometimes relationships cannot or should not be maintained. But the awareness of mortality helps clarify what truly matters and what is merely ego or stubbornness. It helps you distinguish between principles worth defending and preferences that, in the grand scheme of a finite life, are relatively insignificant. Seneca wrote about the shortness of life, arguing that life is long enough if we use it well, but that most people waste their time on pursuits that bring no genuine fulfillment. He observed how people would guard their money carefully but spend their time carelessly, as if time were not the most precious resource of all. The practice of remembering death brings this observation into sharp relief. Time is the substance of your life. How you spend your time is how you spend your life. This recognition might lead you to examine how you actually allocate your hours and days. Not to judge yourself harshly, but to observe honestly. How much time do you spend on activities that genuinely nourish you or contribute to what you value? How much time is spent in distraction, in numbing, in patterns of behavior that you engage in from habit rather than choice? How much time is devoted to people and pursuits that matter to you, and how much to people and pursuits that you have simply never questioned? These questions are not meant to generate guilt or anxiety about past time that you perceive as wasted. The past is not within your control, but they may illuminate choices available to you now. If you have been spending hours each day in activities that, upon honest reflection, bring you no joy and serve no purpose you value, you have the capacity to make different choices. Not all at once, perhaps, not without difficulty, but the possibility exists, and the awareness of mortality can provide motivation to pursue that possibility. The Stoics distinguished between things that are truly good virtue, wisdom, integrity, and things that are merely preferred indifference. Health, wealth, reputation, and even life itself fall into the latter category. They are generally preferable to their opposites, but they are not the ultimate good. The ultimate good is how you relate to whatever circumstances you find yourself in, how you maintain your reason and will and moral purpose regardless of externals. This distinction has practical implications when living with the awareness of mortality. It means that death itself is not the ultimate evil to be avoided at any cost. Death is a neutral indifferent, neither good nor bad in itself. What matters is how you live before death arrives and how you face death when it comes. This removes some of the terror from mortality. You need not cling to life desperately, as if continuing to exist were the only thing of value. Instead, you can live with purpose and integrity, knowing that when death comes, you will have lived well. This does not mean being reckless with your life or failing to take reasonable precautions. The Stoics valued life and believed in caring for yourself appropriately. But they did not believe in allowing the fear of death to dictate all choices, to prevent you from taking reasonable risks, or to keep you from standing up for what matters. Life is to be lived, not merely preserved. And a life lived in constant fear of death is, in a sense, already diminished. Consider how this might apply to everyday decisions. You might be avoiding a difficult conversation because you fear conflict or rejection. But when you remember your mortality, you might ask yourself whether you want to die having never spoken your truth, having never taken the risk of genuine communication. The fear of temporary discomfort is put in perspective by the certainty of eventual death. If you are going to die anyway, why spend your life avoiding risks that might lead to deeper connection or greater authenticity? Or you might be staying in a situation, a job, a relationship, a living arrangement that you know is not right for you, simply because change is difficult and uncertain. The awareness of mortality can provide clarity here as well. Time is passing. You are aging toward death. Do you want to spend your remaining time, whatever its length, in a situation that does not honor who you are and what you value? The risk of change may seem daunting, but the cost of remaining is your irreplaceable life. Again, this is not about making impulsive decisions or abandoning responsibility. Wisdom requires considering consequences, honoring commitments when appropriate, and acting with care for others who may be affected by your choices. But wisdom also requires recognizing when you are living inauthentically, when you are betraying yourself, when you are trading your finite days for a false sense of security or for approval from others who may not even be aware of your sacrifice. The practice of Memento Mori can be supported by certain physical reminders, though these are entirely optional. Some people keep a small object that symbolizes mortality, a particular stone, a piece of art, a ring. The object itself does not matter. What matters is that it serves as a touchstone, a reminder to return to awareness of death and therefore awareness of life. When you notice the object, you remember, this day is finite, this moment is precious. How do I wish to be here? Others find value in periodic contemplation of Memento Mori imagery or texts. Reading passages from Marcus Aurelius or Seneca on mortality, or viewing art that addresses death, can serve as a regular practice of remembering, not with morbid fascination, but with philosophical clarity. These reminders help prevent the natural tendency to forget death, to fall back into the comfortable illusion of unlimited time. The key is to find practices that work for you, that fit naturally into your life rather than feeling forced or artificial. The goal is not to maintain constant awareness of mortality, which would be exhausting and counterproductive. Rather, it is to return periodically to this awareness, allowing it to recalibrate your perspective, to clarify what matters, to deepen your presence. Like adjusting the focus on a camera, remembering death brings life into sharper definition. This might mean focusing more attention on direct, personal impact rather than on visible achievement or status. The way you treat the people in your daily life, family, friends, colleagues, strangers, may matter more than any public accomplishment. The integrity with which you handle small, unobserved choices may be more significant than any external success. When you remember that you will die and that all external achievements will eventually be forgotten, what remains valuable is the quality of your being, the love and wisdom you embodied. The awareness of mortality can also inform how you approach periods of suffering or difficulty. The Stoics believed that pain and adversity were inevitable parts of life, neither good nor bad in themselves, but opportunities to practice virtue. When you are going through a difficult period, remembering that you are mortal can actually provide a strange kind of comfort. This suffering is temporary, not only because the specific circumstances may change, but because you yourself are temporary. Whatever you are enduring, you will not have to endure it forever. Death guarantees that all suffering is time-limited. This is not meant to be nihilistic, as if nothing matters because we all die anyway. Rather, it is meant to provide perspective that can reduce the sense of being overwhelmed by suffering. Yes, this is difficult. Yes, this hurts. But it is finite. It is contained within a larger finitude. And knowing this, you might find that you can bear it with more equanimity, more patience, more courage. The Stoics also believed that suffering could be transformed through the meaning we bring to it. When you face difficulty with courage and wisdom, maintaining your integrity under pressure, you are living virtuously. The difficulty itself becomes an opportunity for excellence. Remembering your mortality can reinforce this perspective. You have limited time to develop virtue, to practice courage, to embody wisdom. Difficulties, then, are not merely obstacles to be endured, but chances to practice what matters most. This does not make suffering enjoyable or desirable. The Stoics were not masochists. They would have preferred pleasant circumstances to painful ones, all else being equal. But they understood that we do not always have that choice. What we always have, even in suffering, is the choice of how we relate to our experience. We can curse it, resist it, allow it to destroy our inner peace. Or we can accept it as part of the temporary existence we have been given and practice responding with wisdom. Consider how you might apply this during your next period of difficulty, whether physical pain, emotional distress, or challenging circumstances. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" or "When will this end?" you might ask, "How can I respond to this with wisdom and courage?" Or "What is this situation calling forth from me?" The awareness that your time to practice such responses is limited can make the practice itself seem more important than the discomfort it arises within. The relationship between Memento Mori practice and sleep itself deserves attention, given the context in which you may be encountering these ideas. Sleep is often called the cousin of death, and there is wisdom in this ancient comparison. Each night when you sleep, you surrender consciousness, letting go of control, entering a state that resembles death in its unconsciousness. And each morning you wake to a kind of rebirth, another day granted to you. This daily cycle can become a practice in itself. As you prepare for sleep each night, you might recognize that you are rehearsing for death. You are practicing letting go, releasing the day, surrendering to unconsciousness. This need not be frightening. Sleep is natural and necessary, even pleasant for most people. If you can approach sleep with ease, trusting in the process of letting go, you are developing the same trust that can help you approach death itself with less fear. Each morning when you wake, you might take a moment to recognize that you have been given another day. You did not create this day or earn it. It has simply come to you, one more day of consciousness before death arrives. How will you meet it? What will you do with these hours? The morning, viewed this way, becomes not just the start of another routine day, but a genuine gift, an opportunity that will not be repeated. This does not require dramatic changes to your morning routine. You need not spend an hour in philosophical contemplation before beginning your day. Simply pausing for a few moments to recognize the gift of another day, to remember your mortality and therefore your life, can be sufficient. This brief pause can set a different tone for the hours that follow, a tone of awareness and appreciation rather than of automatic routine. The evening, similarly, can become a time of gentle reflection and completion. As you prepare for sleep, reviewing the day that has passed, you might release it fully, recognizing that it is now complete and unchangeable. You did what you did, said what you said, experienced what you experienced. That day has joined all your previous days in the past. You cannot revise it or relive it. You can only acknowledge it, learn from it, and then let it go as you surrender to sleep. This practice of daily completion reduces the tendency to carry emotional burdens forward, to lie awake rehashing the day's events, to anxiously plan tomorrow. Each day is its own complete unit. When it ends, you release it. When you wake, you meet whatever comes fresh, without the accumulated weight of days that were not properly completed. This is not about suppressing feelings or avoiding necessary reflection. It is about recognizing natural boundaries and honoring them. The Stoics practiced accepting what is beyond their control, and sleep is largely beyond our control. We can adopt healthy habits and create supportive conditions, but ultimately sleep comes when it comes. Fighting against sleeplessness only creates more distress. Accepting it, neither welcoming nor resisting it, allows you to be at peace whether you sleep or wake. And if you remember your mortality, you recognize that these wakeful hours are also hours of your life, not wasted time but simply time, to be inhabited as fully and peacefully as possible. Throughout your day, you will naturally become absorbed in activities and concerns. This is normal and healthy, but periodically, perhaps triggered by a small reminder or simply by intentional pause, you remember. You are mortal. This moment is part of your finite existence. This person before you is also mortal. This task you are doing is being done by a temporary being who will one day no longer exist. The remembering brings a shift in quality, a deepening of presence, a clarification of what matters. Then you return to ordinary consciousness, to the tasks and interactions of daily life. But something has shifted. The remembering has done its work. You are slightly more present, slightly less caught in trivial concerns, slightly more aware of the preciousness of ordinary existence. This rhythm continues throughout the day, throughout your life. Remembering and forgetting, awareness and absorption. A gentle oscillation that keeps you connected to both the immediacy of life and the larger context of mortality within which all life occurs. The practices we have explored in this segment are not rules to be followed rigidly, but suggestions to be adapted to your own circumstances and temperament. What matters is not the specific form the practice takes, but the underlying orientation it cultivates. An orientation that acknowledges mortality clearly, without denial or morbid fixation. An orientation that allows death awareness to clarify life rather than overshadow it. An orientation that transforms the fact of death from a source of fear into a source of wisdom. We arrive now at a place of gathering. Not a conclusion, but a gentle convergence. Throughout these hours together, we have walked slowly through the landscape of mortality, not as morbid tourists seeking dark thrills, but as students of life seeking clarity. The practice of Memento Mori, of remembering death, has revealed itself not as a fixation on ending, but as an illumination of living. As we move into this final movement of our reflection, we do not seek to summarize or reduce what we have explored. Instead, we allow these ideas to settle more deeply, to find their natural place within the architecture of understanding we have been building together. The Stoics understood something profound about knowledge and wisdom. They recognized that true understanding does not arrive in a single moment of revelation, complete and crystalline. Rather, it accumulates gradually like sediment-forming rock, layer upon patient layer. Marcus Aurelius returned again and again to the same themes in his meditations, not because he forgot what he had written, but because he understood that wisdom requires repeated encounter. Each return to an idea deepens it, shapes it, makes it more fully part of who we are. This is why he could write about death and impermanence throughout his personal writings without exhausting the subject. He was not trying to master death intellectually. He was trying to live well in full awareness of it. What we have been doing together follows this same principle. We have circled around the reality of mortality from different angles, examining it in different lights, allowing it to reveal different aspects of its significance. We have considered death as natural process and universal equalizer. We have explored how awareness of mortality clarifies values and reduces trivial anxieties. We have investigated the relationship between impermanence and appreciation, between limitation and meaning. And we have seen, repeatedly, that remembering death does not diminish life but enriches it, does not paralyze action but motivates it, does not create despair but generates profound peace. This integration is not separate from the practice itself. The Stoic approach to Memento Mori was never meant to be merely contemplative. It was designed to be transformative, to change not just what we think but how we live. Seneca wrote extensively about the relationship between philosophy and practice, insisting that wisdom without application is hollow, that understanding without transformation is incomplete. When we remember death, When we truly allow its reality to inform our consciousness, something shifts in how we move through the world. Priorities rearrange themselves. Grievances lose their grip. Small joys gain significance. The texture of ordinary experience becomes richer, more vivid, more precious. Consider how different this is from the way mortality usually functions in contemporary consciousness. For many, death exists as a background anxiety, rarely examined directly but constantly exerting pressure. It manifests as vague dread, as desperate grasping at youth, as frantic accumulation of experiences or possessions or accomplishments. This relationship with mortality creates suffering precisely because death is neither accepted nor honestly confronted. It remains a shadowy presence, powerful but unacknowledged, shaping behavior through fear rather than wisdom. The Stoic practice offers an alternative. By bringing death into clear awareness, by examining it directly and repeatedly, we drain it of its anxious power. The Stoics were not superhuman. They experienced the full range of human emotion. But they understood that we need not be controlled by fear, that rational understanding can provide a foundation beneath emotional, whether that acceptance of what cannot be changed brings a particular kind of freedom. As we move deeper into this integration, notice what has emerged through our extended reflection. Death awareness, properly understood, functions as a clarifying lens. It helps us distinguish between what matters and what merely seems to matter. It reveals the difference between genuine value and social performance. It shows us where we have been spending our limited time and energy, whether in alignment with our deepest values or in service to borrowed expectations and unexamined habits. This clarity is Memento Mori's great gift. Not fear but focus, not despair but discrimination. The practice also reveals something crucial about time itself. We often live as though time were infinite, as though there will always be another opportunity, another chance, another tomorrow. This illusion allows procrastination of what matters most. We delay the conversation that needs to happen, postpone the work that calls to us, put off the kindness we might offer. Meanwhile, we spend hours on what we would not choose if we truly felt time's finitude. Remembering death does not make us frantic or reckless. It makes us thoughtful, prompts the question, if time is genuinely limited, how do I want to use what remains? This question has enormous practical power, cuts through layers of complexity and reveals simple truth. Much of what occupies our attention, much of what we worry about and struggle over, simply would not survive this question's scrutiny. The petty dispute, the status anxiety, the grudge carefully maintained, the approval frantically sought. When viewed against the reality of mortality, these concerns lose their apparent urgency. They are revealed as the trivial preoccupations they truly are. This does not mean life becomes careless or nihilistic. Quite the opposite. Life becomes more carefully attended to, more deliberately chosen, more genuinely our own. The Stoics spoke often of living in accordance with nature, and mortality is perhaps the most fundamental aspect of our nature. We are temporal beings. Our existence has boundaries. This is not a flaw in the design but a feature of it. The boundedness of life is what gives it shape and meaning. A song without ending would not be a longer song but would cease to be a song at all. A story that never concludes would not be an infinite story but simply chaos. Our lives, limited as they are, can be complete and beautiful precisely because they are limited. This is a difficult truth, one that resists easy acceptance, but it is a truth that, once genuinely understood, transforms everything. We arrive now at a place of gathering. not a conclusion but a gentle convergence. Throughout these hours together, we have walked slowly through the landscape of mortality, not as morbid tourists seeking dark thrills, but as students of life seeking clarity. The practice of memento mori, of remembering death, has revealed itself not as a fixation on ending but as an illumination of living. As we move into this final movement of our reflection, we do not seek to summarize or reduce what we have explored. Instead, we allow these ideas to settle more deeply, to find their natural place within the architecture of understanding we have been building together. The Stoics understood something profound about knowledge and wisdom. They recognized that true understanding does not arrive in a single moment of revelation, complete and crystalline. Rather, it accumulates gradually like sediment-forming rock, layer upon patient layer. Marcus Aurelius returned again and again to the same themes in his meditations, not because he forgot what he had written, but because he understood that wisdom requires repeated encounter. Each return to an idea deepens it, shapes it, makes it more fully part of who we are. This is why he could write about death and impermanence throughout his personal writings without exhausting the subject. He was not trying to master death intellectually. He was trying to live well in full awareness of it. What we have been doing together follows this same principle. We have circled around the reality of mortality from different angles, examining it in different lights, allowing it to reveal different aspects of its significance. We have considered death as natural process and universal equalizer. We have explored how awareness of mortality clarifies values and reduces trivial anxieties. We have investigated the relationship between impermanence and appreciation, between limitation and meaning. And we have seen, repeatedly, that remembering death does not diminish life but enriches it, does not paralyze action but motivates it, does not create despair but generates profound peace. This integration is not separate from the practice itself. The Stoic approach to memento mori was never meant to be merely contemplative. It was designed to be transformative, to change not just what we think but how we live. Seneca wrote extensively about the relationship between philosophy and practice, insisting that wisdom without application is hollow, that understanding without transformation is incomplete. When we remember death, when we truly allow its reality to inform our consciousness, something shifts in how we move through the world. Priorities rearrange themselves. Grievances lose their grip. Small joys gain significance. The texture of ordinary experience becomes richer, more vivid, more precious. Consider how different this is from the way mortality usually functions in contemporary consciousness. For many, death exists as a background anxiety, rarely examined directly but constantly exerting pressure. It manifests as vague dread, as desperate grasping at youth, as frantic accumulation of experiences or possessions or accomplishments. This relationship with mortality creates suffering precisely because death is neither accepted nor honestly confronted. It remains a shadowy presence, powerful but unacknowledged, shaping behavior through fear rather than wisdom. The Stoic practice offers an alternative. By bringing death into clear awareness, by examining it directly and repeatedly, we drain it of its anxious power. We see it for what it is, a natural event, neither good nor bad, as inevitable as birth, as ordinary as breathing. This clear sight does not eliminate all fear. The Stoics were not superhuman. They experienced the full range of human emotion. But they understood that we need not be controlled by fear, that rational understanding can provide a foundation beneath emotional, whether that acceptance of what cannot be changed brings a particular kind of freedom. As we move deeper into this integration, notice what has emerged through our extended reflection. Death awareness, properly understood, functions as a clarifying lens. It helps us distinguish between what matters and what merely seems to matter. It reveals the difference between genuine value and social performance. It shows us where we have been spending our limited time and energy, whether in alignment with our deepest values or in service to borrowed expectations and unexamined habits. This clarity is Memento Mori's great gift, not fear but focus, not despair but discrimination. The practice also reveals something crucial about time itself. We often live as though time were infinite, as though there will always be another opportunity, another chance, another tomorrow. This illusion allows procrastination of what matters most. We delay the conversation that needs to happen, postpone the work that calls to us, put off the kindness we might offer. Meanwhile, we spend hours on what we would not choose if we truly felt time's finitude. Remembering death does not make us frantic or reckless. It makes us thoughtful, prompts the question, if time is genuinely limited, how do I want to use what remains? This question has enormous practical power, cuts through layers of complexity and reveals simple truth. Much of what occupies our attention, much of what we worry about and struggle over, simply would not survive this question's scrutiny. The petty dispute, the status anxiety, the grudge carefully maintained, the approval frantically sought. When viewed against the reality of mortality, these concerns lose their apparent urgency. Life becomes more carefully attended to, more deliberately chosen, more genuinely our own. The Stoics spoke often of living in accordance with nature, and mortality is perhaps the most fundamental aspect of our nature. We are temporal beings. Our existence has boundaries. This is not a flaw in the design but a feature of it. The boundedness of life is what gives it shape and meaning. A song without ending would not be a longer song but would cease to be a song at all. A story that never concludes would not be an infinite story but simply chaos. Our lives, limited as they are, can be complete and beautiful precisely because they are limited. This is a difficult truth, one that resists easy acceptance, but it is a truth that, once genuinely understood, transforms everything. Integration of this understanding happens not all at once but gradually, through repeated return and patient practice. You might think of it as similar to learning a complex piece of music. Initially, the notes must be carefully studied, the fingering consciously practiced, the rhythm deliberately counted. The piece feels foreign, awkward, effortful. But with patient repetition, something changes. The music begins to internalize. The fingers find their places without conscious direction. The rhythm becomes natural. Eventually, the piece is not something you perform but something that flows through you, effortless and complete. The practice of Memento Mori follows a similar path. At first, remembering death requires deliberate effort. It feels strange, perhaps uncomfortable. But over time, this awareness becomes integrated, a quiet background consciousness that informs without overwhelming, that clarifies without disturbing. Marcus Aurelius offers a beautiful model for this integration. Throughout the meditations, death appears not as a single argument to be made and concluded but as a constant companion to thought. When he considers his obligations to others, mortality is there, reminding him that time for kindness is limited. When he examines his own reactions to difficulty, death provides perspective, showing him that even hardship is temporary. When he reflects on the nature of fame or legacy, mortality reveals the vanity of these concerns. Death is not a separate topic for Marcus but a thread woven through his entire philosophy, coloring everything without dominating anything. This is integration in its fullest sense, not compartmentalization but synthesis. We can observe in his writing how this integration served him practically. As Emperor of Rome, Marcus faced extraordinary pressures and responsibilities. He dealt with wars, political intrigue, economic challenges, and the constant demands of power. He could have been consumed by these pressures, overwhelmed by their apparent urgency and importance. But his regular practice of remembering death provided ballast. It reminded him that even emperors die, that Rome itself would one day fall, that all the drama of politics and power was, in the largest view, temporary and small. This perspective did not make him neglectful of his duties. Rather, it allowed him to fulfill them with equanimity, with clarity about what truly mattered, without the frantic desperation that comes from believing everything depends on us and lasts forever. This same clarity is available to us, though we do not bear the weight of empire. The specifics of our challenges differ from Marcus's, but the essential human situation remains constant. We all face demands on our time and energy. We all encounter difficulties and disappointments. We all must make choices about how to live and what to prioritize. And we all face the reality that our time is limited, that we will not get to do everything, that choices have costs, that life requires trade-offs. In this situation, the practice of Memento Mori functions as a compass, orienting us toward what genuinely matters, away from what merely seems to matter because of social pressure or unexamined habit. As the day unfolds, challenges arise. Someone treats you rudely. Project encounters obstacles. News brings reports of distant troubles. Without mortality awareness, these events can feel enormously important, even overwhelming. But when you maintain even a quiet background consciousness of death, perspective shifts. The rude person is also mortal, also struggling, also dealing with their own fears and pains. The obstacle in your project, frustrating as it is temporary, and your time might be better spent finding creative solutions than dwelling in frustration. The distant troubles matter, and your compassion is appropriate, but anxiety that produces no useful action serves no one. This perspective does not make you cold or indifferent. It makes you effective, calm, able to respond rather than react. As evening comes and you review your day, Memento Mori provides a measure for evaluation. Did you spend your limited time in ways you can affirm? Did you show up as the person you want to be? Were you present for what mattered or distracted by what does not? This accounting is not about guilt or shame. It is about learning, about refining your understanding of what you truly value, about making tomorrow's choices clearer. And when you lie down to sleep, the awareness that you might not wake, that this day might have been your last, brings a particular quality of peace. If this were the end, could you accept it? If not, what needs to change? These are not comfortable questions, but they are clarifying ones. Over time, this daily practice deepens. Memento Mori stops feeling like an exercise you perform and becomes simply part of how you see. You notice beauty more readily because you are aware it is temporary. You forgive more easily because holding grudges against fellow mortals seems absurd. You speak more honestly because you recognize that opportunities for truth are limited. You love more openly because you know that everyone you care about will die, that this present moment of connection is precious precisely because it will not last forever. This is not the morbid fixation that death-phobic culture fears. This is life lived fully, richly, with eyes open. The Stoics understood that this kind of transformation cannot be forced or rushed. Seneca often counseled patience with oneself, recognizing that we are all works in progress, that philosophical understanding develops gradually, that setbacks and struggles are part of the path. When you find yourself resisting the reality of death, when you catch yourself living as though you have infinite time, when you notice yourself consumed by trivial concerns despite your intention otherwise, this is not failure. This is simply being human. The practice is not about achieving perfect acceptance of mortality, but about continually returning to it, about gently reminding yourself of what you know to be true, about allowing that truth to shape you incrementally, season by season, year by year. There is profound freedom in accepting what cannot be changed. This principle stands at the heart of Stoic philosophy and finds its ultimate expression in the acceptance of mortality. We spend enormous energy resisting the inevitable. We wage small wars against aging, against change, against the passage of time itself. These wars are unwinnable. The universe does not bend to our preferences regarding its fundamental operations. Death comes to every living thing. This has been true for billions of years. It will remain true for billions more. Our resistance to this fact does not alter it. It only makes us miserable while the fact remains unchanged. The alternative that Stoicism offers is not resignation or defeat, but clear-eyed acceptance. There is a crucial difference between these states. Resignation is passive, bitter, accompanied by resentment. It says, "The world is not as I wish it to be, and I am powerless, and this is terrible." Acceptance, by contrast, is active, peaceful, accompanied by understanding. It says, "The world is as it is, neither good nor bad, and I can work with reality rather than against it, and this is liberating." When we accept mortality not with resignation but with genuine acceptance, we stop wasting energy on futile resistance. That energy becomes available for living, for creating, for loving, for all the things we can actually do in the time we have. Epictetus taught his students to carefully distinguish between what is up to them and what is not. This practice, the dichotomy of control, is fundamental to Stoic peace of mind. Our opinions, our intentions, our efforts, our character, these are up to us. The outcomes of our efforts, what others think of us, how long we live, what happens in the world, these are not up to us or are only partially so. Wisdom lies in focusing energy on the former and accepting the latter. Death clearly falls into the category of what is not up to us. We do not control when we die. We do not control the fact that we will die. This is simply given part of the structure of existence. To make peace with this fact is not to give up but to grow up, to mature into reality as it actually is. This acceptance ripples outward, affecting everything. When you truly accept your own death, you begin to accept other things as well. The imperfection of life, the inevitability of loss, the impossibility of controlling what others do or think. The fact that plans fall through, that bodies age, that circumstances change. You stop demanding that life conform to your preferences and start meeting life as it presents itself. This shift is subtle but transformative. It does not eliminate problems or prevent disappointment, but it changes your relationship to difficulty. Instead of adding psychological suffering to necessary pain, instead of compounding problems with resistance and resentment, you meet challenges more simply, more directly, with less internal drama. Consider how much suffering comes not from circumstances themselves, but from our relationship to circumstances. Someone close to you dies. The grief is real and appropriate. But if you have never accepted mortality, if death remains for you an outrage against how things should be, then your grief is compounded by existential horror, by the sense that something fundamentally wrong has occurred. If, however, you have integrated the reality that all living things die, that loss is built into the structure of love, that death is natural and universal, then grief remains but the horror lessens. You can mourn without feeling betrayed by the universe. You can hurt without believing that hurt means something has gone terribly wrong with existence itself. This is the paradox of acceptance. By ceasing to fight the inevitable, we become more powerful, not less. Our energy, no longer wasted on futile resistance, becomes available for genuine agency. We can focus on what we actually can affect: our choices, our responses, our character, our treatment of others. In these domains, we have real power. The person who has accepted death can live with remarkable intentionality, precisely because they are not wasting effort trying to prevent the inevitable. The Stoics lived this principle. Marcus Aurelius, despite being emperor of Rome with access to unprecedented power and wealth, remained aware that he could not control whether he would die or when. He could control how he faced that reality. He could control the character he brought to his remaining days. Seneca, when finally ordered to commit suicide by Nero, faced his death calmly, not because he wanted to die, but because he had long since accepted that death would come and that it was not the worst thing. His final hours, as reported by Tacitus, show a man at peace with the inevitable, focusing on reassuring his friends rather than railing against fate. This is acceptance in action, not as theoretical principle but as lived reality. You might wonder whether this acceptance of death, this peace with mortality, makes life less precious. The opposite is true. When you genuinely accept that life is limited, that death is certain, each moment becomes more valuable, not less. The time you have shines with significance precisely because there is not an infinite supply of it. The people you love become dearer when you remember that you will lose them, or they will lose you. The ordinary experiences of being alive, the taste of food, the feeling of sunlight, the sound of laughter, the satisfaction of good work, all of these become richer when appreciated against the background of mortality. This is not morbid. This is awake. There is a lightness that comes with this acceptance as well, a particular kind of ease. When you stop demanding that life be other than it is, when you stop insisting that you should not have to die, when you release the fantasy of control over the uncontrollable, a weight lifts. You can move through life more freely. You can take yourself less seriously while taking your values more seriously. You can hold plans lightly while holding principles firmly. You can care deeply about outcomes while not being destroyed by outcomes you cannot prevent. This combination of deep care and light holding might seem contradictory, but in practice it is simply mature. It is the stance of someone who has integrated the reality of impermanence and found freedom in that integration. As we settle more deeply into this reflection, we might consider what it means to live well in the face of death. This question occupied the Stoics constantly. They understood that philosophy was not merely about thinking correctly but about living well. And they recognized that any answer to the question of how to live well must account for mortality. A philosophy that ignores death, that proceeds as though we were immortal, cannot guide us toward genuine human flourishing. It will miss something essential about our situation. Only by facing mortality directly can we develop wisdom adequate to our actual existence. Living well in the face of death means, first, living deliberately. The examined life that Socrates spoke of becomes urgent when we remember that life is limited. We do not have time to waste on paths we have not chosen, on values we have not examined, on a life lived by default rather than by design. This does not mean every moment must be optimized or every choice must be profound. Ordinary life, simple pleasures, quiet days, these have their place and value. But the overall direction of life, the broad shape of how we spend our years, this deserves conscious attention. Memento Mori prompts the examination. Am I living a life I can affirm? Am I becoming who I want to become? Am I spending my limited time in ways that reflect what I actually value? These questions require courage to ask and honesty to answer. Often, when we truly examine our lives against the reality of death, we discover discrepancies. We realize we have been spending enormous energy on things we do not actually care about. We notice that we have been postponing what matters most. We see that we have been living for approval or comfort or habit rather than for genuine meaning. This recognition can be uncomfortable, but it is also the beginning of change. Once you see clearly how you have been living, you can begin to choose differently. This is Memento Mori's practical function. It reveals misalignment between stated values and actual behavior, creating opportunity for correction. Living well in the face of death also means living virtuously. The Stoics placed virtue, wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation at the center of their ethics. They argued that virtue is the only true good, that external circumstances are merely preferred or dispreferred indifference. This might seem abstract, but it has immediate relevance to mortality. Everything external can be taken from you. Your health, your wealth, your relationships, your reputation. All of these are impermanent. Death will ultimately separate you from all of them. But your character, the kind of person you choose to be, this remains yours until the very end. Even in the worst circumstances, you can still choose courage over cowardice, integrity over deception, kindness over cruelty. This choice, this agency over your own character, cannot be taken away. It is the one arena of complete freedom. When you organize your life around virtue rather than around external outcomes, death loses much of its terror. If virtue is what matters most and virtue remains possible until death, then you can live well regardless of when death comes. You might die young or old, healthy or sick, accomplished or obscure. But if you have lived virtuously, if you have been the kind of person you respect, then your life is complete regardless of its length. This is radically different from a life organized around achievement or accumulation or experience. Such lives can never be complete because there is always one more thing to achieve, acquire, or experience. Death always comes too soon, always interrupts, always leaves the project unfinished. But a life organized around virtue can be complete at any moment. This is profound freedom. Consider also that living virtuously serves others, not just yourself. When you choose courage, you inspire courage in those around you. When you choose integrity, you make integrity more possible for others. When you choose kindness, you create ripples of kindness that spread beyond your sight. The Stoics understood that human beings are social creatures, that we are deeply interconnected, that our choices affect far more than just ourselves. Marcus Aurelius frequently reminded himself that he was part of a larger whole, that he had obligations to the human community, that his purpose included contributing to the common good. This sense of participation in something larger than yourself provides meaning that transcends personal mortality. You will die, but your contributions to the flourishing of others continue. The kindness you showed, the example you set, the work you did, these ripple forward, affecting people you will never meet, shaping a future you will not see. The Stoics would say that this moment right now is where life is happening. Not in some imagined future, not in remembered past, but here in the immediate present. This is where choice occurs, where virtue is practiced, where life is actually lived. Death awareness helps us stay present to this reality. When you remember that you might not have tomorrow, today becomes vivid. This conversation, this work, this sunset, this meal shared with someone you care about, these are not rehearsals for real life to come later. This is real life, happening now, precious and unrepeatable. To be fully present for it, to bring your best self to it, to appreciate it while it is occurring. This is to live well in the face of death. The Stoics did care about living in a way that would be worthy of respect, including posthumous respect. The distinction is subtle but important. They did not live virtuously in order to be remembered well. They lived virtuously because virtue is intrinsically valuable, because it is the right way to live, because it represents human excellence. If others remembered them well, this was a natural byproduct, not the goal. This distinction frees you from anxious concern about how you will be perceived while still motivating you to live in a way you can respect. You aim for virtue not for reputation but for its own sake, because that is who you want to be, because that is what it means to be fully human. We have traveled a long path together through these hours. We began with the simple but profound reality of mortality, with the fact that death comes to all living things, that our time here is limited, that this is not a problem to be solved but a truth to be accepted. We explored how the Stoic practice of Memento Mori, of consciously remembering death, functions not as morbid fixation but as clarifying wisdom. We saw how awareness of mortality reduces trivial anxieties by providing perspective, how it enhances appreciation by highlighting impermanence, how it motivates authentic living precisely because time is limited. Throughout this exploration, we have returned repeatedly to certain insights, allowing them to deepen through repetition and examination from different angles. This is how wisdom accumulates, not through single encounter but through patient return, through seeing the same truth from multiple perspectives until it becomes integrated, until it shifts from intellectual understanding to lived reality. The Stoics knew this. Their practices were designed for gradual transformation, for the slow reshaping of consciousness that occurs when we persistently attend to what is true and important. What emerges from this extended reflection is not a formula or a fixed conclusion, but a different way of being in the world. When you genuinely integrate the reality of mortality, when it becomes not just something you know intellectually but something that informs your daily consciousness, life changes texture. Priorities clarify themselves. Trivial concerns lose their grip. Present moments become more vivid. Relationships deepen. Work becomes more intentional. You begin to inhabit your life more fully, with less resistance to what is and more appreciation for what remains. This transformation is available to everyone. It does not require special circumstances or unusual abilities. It simply requires willingness to face what we often prefer to avoid, to sit with the discomfort of mortality until it becomes familiar, to allow that familiarity to teach what it has to teach. The Stoics were not superhuman. They were ordinary people who chose to practice philosophy seriously, who recognized that wisdom requires effort and attention, who committed to the ongoing work of aligning their lives with truth. We can make the same choice. We can practice the same awareness. We can receive the same benefits. As you move forward from this reflection, you carry with you everything we have explored. These ideas are not meant to remain in the abstract realm of philosophy. They are meant to be lived, to be tested against experience, to be refined through practice. You might begin simply with small moments of remembrance. In the morning, recall that this day is limited and precious. At night, acknowledge that you might not see tomorrow. When faced with decision, ask what mortality awareness suggests about the choice. When caught in trivial anxiety, remember that all of this is temporary. These small practices accumulate. Over time, they change how you see and how you live. There will be resistance. Part of you will want to retreat from death awareness, to return to comfortable illusions of permanence and control. This is natural. We are built to avoid thinking about death. It is an old evolutionary inheritance that once served survival. But we are also capable of overriding instinct with understanding, of choosing wisdom over comfort. When you notice resistance, meet it gently. You do not need to force acceptance. Simply return to the practice. Remember what is true. Notice how that truth feels in your body, in your thoughts, in your daily choices. Be patient with yourself. Transformation takes time. The peace that comes from accepting mortality is different from the peace that comes from avoiding thoughts of death. The latter is fragile, maintained by effort and distraction, always threatened by reminders of what we are trying not to see. The former is stable, grounded in reality, deepened rather than threatened by life's changes and losses. It is the peace of someone who has looked clearly at what is and found a way to affirm it, to say yes to existence as it actually is rather than as we might wish it to be. This is the peace the Stoics sought and taught. This is the peace that becomes possible when we stop fighting the inevitable and start living fully within the time we have. Consider that every person you have ever loved, every person who has ever loved you, was mortal. Every moment of joy you have experienced occurred within a finite life. Every achievement, every bit of beauty, every instance of courage or kindness or meaning, all of it happened in the presence of death, in the context of limitation. Mortality is not separate from life. It is the container within which life happens, the frame that makes the picture possible. To accept this is not to diminish life but to see it clearly, to appreciate its actual texture and substance, to stop wishing it were something other than what it is. The Stoics invite us into this clearer sight. They do not promise that it will always be comfortable. Truth is not always comfortable, but they do suggest that it leads to something more valuable than comfort. It leads to wisdom, to peace, to freedom, to a life genuinely lived rather than merely endured or avoided. They tested these teachings against the hardest circumstances and found them sufficient. Marcus Aurelius practiced philosophy while leading armies and administering an empire, while dealing with plague and betrayal and constant threat. Epictetus developed his wisdom while enslaved, his freedom of body severely constrained. Seneca faced his death with calm, his philosophy adequate even to that final test. Their example shows us that this wisdom works, that it serves in difficulty as well as in ease, that it can sustain us through whatever comes. We come to rest, then, not at a conclusion but at a continuation. The reflection might end, but the practice continues. Let these ideas rest in you like stones settling in water, finding their place without force. And may your days, however many remain, be lived with awareness and appreciation, with courage and kindness, with the peace that comes from accepting what cannot be changed and focusing on what can. The night is quiet. The wisdom is old. The practice is simple. Remember death that you might truly live.